Chapter 162. The Final Craziness 4. A gift from the venerable divine dragon was naturally not an ordinary item. Although it was a very short volume, moreover, it was only the beginner's introduction part. However, this volume of the Great Dimensional Imprint had astonishing might. The results were remarkable. The Great Dimensional Imprint, as the name implied, was divided into 3 stages: width, virtual, and space. Width referred to the imprint getting larger and larger until it became limitless. Virtual referred to a virtual shadow. After the second stage boundary, the imprint would become a virtual shadow, a formless way to injure people. Space referred to the gravity in a certain space. Once the third boundary had been reached, the imprint of the virtual shadow would change into an area where the space had gravity. In this area of space, she was the master. And right now Su Luo. Within her space, Su Luo watched her own successfully condensed imprint in her palms. 3 black lines formed on her forehead, and she was rendered speechless. Because that so-called imprint was only the size of a tadpole. Yes, that's right, it really was only the size of a tadpole. However, compared to a few days ago, this was already considered pretty good. Now she had already condensed out something. A few days ago, she couldn't even see a shadow of an imprint. Furthermore, this method of cultivation was effortless. At any time or anywhere, and even when sleeping, her spirit could enter her space to practice. Therefore, compared to other people, in terms of time and place, she would have the absolute advantage. It was also because her innate talent and mental power were both super strong. Thus, when she started to cultivate, she had to put in half the effort to get twice the result. What Su Luo did not know was that the Great Dimensional Imprint's most difficult part was to enter the door of this cultivation. An outstanding aptitude like Su Luo's actually entered the threshold of this cultivation in less than 7 days. She was able to condense an imprint in the palm of her hand. Although small, it had still actually appeared. A slow-witted person's aptitude, even if granted 7 months or 7 years, they still wouldn't be able to condense out an imprint the size of a melon seed. Deep dark night. Not a sound could be heard all around. The night sky appeared to be covered by a thin, cotton-like layer of dust. In the middle of the lonely sky hanged a few remnant stars. The clear and cold moonlight was bleak, devoid of any brightness. Su Luo laid on the bed sleeping soundly. However, her spirit had already entered her space to practice the Great Dimensional Imprint. Since that day when she was able to condense out the tiny tadpole-sized dimensional imprint, afterwards, Su Luo had a gut feeling. She felt as if she had already set foot onto the first rank of a martial artist. Moreover, her distance to the second rank didn't seem all that far away. This discovery immediately made her ecstatic. These few days, what she did the most was to lie on her bed and sleep. Lu Luo had the mistaken impression that her own miss was tired out from going out this time. Therefore she was sleeping a lot to recuperate her body. How could she ever even imagine that there was a fortunate person who could self-cultivate in their sleep? She was perfectly content with Su Luo obediently staying in the courtyard and not attempting to go out. As a result, she did not bother to urge her to get up, making Su Luo happy, relaxed, and at ease. This evening, Su Luo, just like before, had already finished washing her face, rinsing her mouth, and climbed onto her bed to sleep. Early in the morning, around 3 o'clock, the darkness before the dawn. This short period of time was very special. It was the darkest time of the day. It was also the time when tired people's sleep was the deepest. It was usually the most difficult time to wake people up with noise. In the darkness of the night, a strong and energetic figure, quick as a ravenous wolf, quietly approached Su Luo's courtyard. He stood at the entrance of the courtyard, speechlessly curling his lips. There was such a broken-down house in the great General Su's manor. The wall was worn out and broken, as if a gentle blow from the wind would collapse it. The most marvelous thing was that there was no door. He didn't even need to climb over the wall. He could just directly enter. Was this really the 4th Miss Su's home? A touch of puzzlement flashed across the eyes of the black-clothed person. However, what does it have to do with me? As long as he finished this task, he would pick up 1,000 pieces of gold coins. Chapter 163. The Final Craziness 5. he quietly found his way into the inner courtyard. He accurately walked towards the room where Su Luo was sleeping. If nobody had secretly told him, how could he in a short time distinguish which room was Su Luo's? Who was he? Coming over in the dead of the night? What did he want to do? Inside of the room, Su Luo, who was in deep slumber, suddenly opened her eyes. In the dark, a pair of beautiful eyes glistened brightly, with ruthless rays of light. In her previous life, Su Luo was a top gold medal assassin. Having resided in the dark underworld for a long time, she had an instinct for danger residing in her body and vigilance. Even though the martial arts of the black-clothed person at the door was a lot higher than hers, however, she was still awakened by her instincts. The black-clothed person was probably warned by someone, therefore his actions were unusually cautious. He did not take Su Luo to be someone without a bit of martial arts, a good-for-nothing. One could only see him wordlessly poke a hole in the paper part of the window and very carefully blow sleeping gas into the bedroom. The corner of Su Luo's mouth lifted into a cruel and bloodthirsty sneer. Sleeping gas. Unexpectedly, he had used sleeping gas worth 100 gold coins against her. They really thought she was worth it. Sleeping gas could only be refined by apothecaries. People who inhaled the gas would go limp from head to toe. In addition, the sleeping gas was composed of a strong hallucinogen and an aphrodisiac. After breathing it in, the body would be seeped in an extremely fierce desire. To get rid of this drug, the affected person must have sex. Su Luo faintly smiled. She slowly, little by little, approached that small pipe fixated on that small tube. Su Luo leaned close, and with all her force blowed into it. Cough, cough, cough. How could the black-clothed person ever imagine that inside the room, Su Luo would be awake? Moreover, she would blow the sleeping gas in the small pipe back towards him? Temporarily, he didn't discover it, and inhaled a mouthful, immediately choked and started to cough violently. Fortunately, when he entered, he had already knocked Lu Luo out. Therefore, the servant girl was not awakened by the coughing sound, so she couldn't shriek loudly and raised an alarm, taking advantage that he didn't take her life. This opportunity only knocked once. Su Luo also did not open the door. She took out a small incense-length pipe from her space. She quickly used this small pipe to poke through the paper part of the window, and suddenly blew towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed person's sleeping gas was refined by a mere elementary apothecary. However, Su Luo's sleeping gas was something she roped Apothecary Lung into personally refining for her. It was colorless, odorless, and the effect was wonderfully strong. Su Luo used her martial arts to inhale, aimed at the small pipe, and blew 3 mouthfuls of air in a row. Cough, cough, cough. Cough, cough, cough. The black-clothed man was choked by the suddenly rise of smoke that covered his mouth and nose. He repeatedly coughed, as if he was about to cough his lungs out. Su Luo sinisterly and coldly smiled. Only at this time did she open the door. She kicked her foot out, and sent the black-clothed man to the ground. Su Luo crouched down and nimbly pulled off the black-clothed man's face mask. Right now his complexion was flushed, both eyes were red, and in its darkness hid a strange radiance. It was quite obvious that he was infected by the sleeping gas, and its poisonous effects. This face was unfamiliar, and also very average. Such an average look among a crowd of people would be hard to pick out. It was indeed a face perfectly suited for a hitman. Unfortunately, if it was the Su Luo before, perhaps he had a chance to win. However, the current Su Luo was almost at the 2nd rank, plus all of her previous life's fighting skills. The black-clothed man in front of her would only be suppressed. Su Luo's expression was deep and frightening. It emitted a threatening and deadly aura. She smiled sinisterly. Speak, who sent you here? Coming to her room in the dead of the night. What were they trying to do? The black-clothed man's face was malevolent. His entire body emitted a green light. His palm struck towards Su Luo. Chapter 164. The Final Craziness 6. His body was currently affected by the sleeping gas, but the black-clothed man still had not lost all rational thought. Some of his martial arts skills still remained. He was a grand 3rd-ranked martial artist. In his organization, the black-clothed man was also ranked near the top. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to take on this task. No matter how outsiders regarded her, Su Luo had always been the Su family's fourth Mississippi. She still represented the great General Su's manor. This palm strike contained all the black-clothed man's formidable power. He had used all his remaining strength. The black-clothed man had originally thought that even if this palm strike couldn't kill the opponent, it would still inflict serious damage. However, the reality stunned him. He could only look on as Su Luo moved to the side to avoid his strike. At the same time, the hollow of her palm suddenly had a tiny black dot. This black dot was very strange. It seemed to glitter with a tiny halo. It carried a trace of virtual shadow, as it smashed ruthlessly on the head of the black-clothed man. Who would have thought that such a tiny black dot would be so hard? Only the crisp sound of the strike was heard. Then the black-clothed man's eyes immediately shrank to mosquito size. He swayed, feeling somewhat dizzy and confused. When Su Luo saw this, her heart became overjoyed. She had never thought that such a tiny black dot would be so miraculous. Seeing the effects, this small dot's actual might was not small at all. Also, it came and went without a trace. It could appear and disappear unexpectedly, and change rapidly. It was simply impossible for the enemy to guard against. She had taken out the tiny black dot to put it through a practice run to test it out. Now, she was really satisfied with the result of the test. Su Luo with a delighted disposition observed the black-clothed man. In her hand, she held a handful of red pills. She counted each one in front of his face. "I don't want to kill you, but I do want you to swallow something. Look here. This is a heartbreak pill. This pill disperses 5 poisons. This is a hold back the heart pill. These bright red medicinal pills were all violent and slow poisons. All the pills had been made especially for Su Luo, by Apothecary Lung grudgingly, after she had pestered him non-stop. Each time Su Luo said a name, the black-clothed man's body would shiver once. As a hitman, he was not afraid of death nor pain. However, he was afraid of being tortured to the point that he wanted to die, but still could not. These medicinal pills were all toxic, but not fatal. There were no antidotes to these pills. Moreover, the poison would strike intermittently, bringing random bouts of continuous pain. He was simply very baffled. Every single one of these pills were priceless. How could the fourth Miss Su in this rundown courtyard have them? If she sold only one, it would be sufficient to buy a manor bigger than the Su manor. Therefore, this situation was very hard for him to comprehend. Su Luo looked at him. The corner of her mouth lifted into a sneer that was cold and extremely dangerous. You can choose not to tell. However, the consequences of this choice, I hope you will be able to bear it. She had specifically asked for these poisons from Apothecary Lung. The purpose of the poisons was for when she met with a situation like today, where they could be used to extort a confession. Therefore, each poisonous pill had been carefully selected by Su Luo. She believed that medicinal pills was useless against someone of Nangong Liuyun's level of expertise, someone that had firm willpower. However, regarding the overwhelming majority of people, 100 tries would result in 100% success. Sure enough, the black-clothed man's sinister appearance glared at Su Luo with alarm. He stated one word at a time. "You must guarantee that after I finish speaking, you will absolutely not force me to swallow any of those poisons." The corner of Su Luo's mouth shifted into a sneer. Apparently, the person behind the scenes was just So. The so-called expert he or she had invited over was only a common martial artist. Moreover, the integrity of the hitman was very weak. According to principle, hitmen had harsh occupational ethics. Even if they died, they absolutely could not reveal any of their clients' information. This was the standard practice, and an unbreakable rule in the world of the hitman. You said it before. These poisons are all very expensive. Do you feel that this lady is a wasteful type of person? Speak. In the end, who hired you? Su Luo had both arms crossed in front of her chest, and lazily casted sidelong glances at him while speaking. Chapter 165. The Final Craziness 7. She had a languid expression, like a cat bathing in the sun, and also like a king that had everything under control. The black-clothed man bit his lower lip, hesitating for a while before finally gritting his teeth and said, "It is your family's third Mississippi. This task was issued by her." "The third Miss? Suwan." Sure enough, it was that person as expected. In fact, Su Luo's first guess was her, but she lacked strong evidence as proof. A smiling expression slowly emerged on Su Luo's face. It was an ice-cold and dangerously threatening smile. The third older sister? How could it be her? You are simply saying nonsense. When the black-clothed man heard what was said, he became somewhat anxious. I have proof. Saying this, he took out a piece of paper from the mercenary union from his clothing. Trembling, he handed it over to Su Luo. You see, this is your family's third Mrs. own handwriting for the contract of this task and her signature. If you don't believe it, go ahead and carefully look at it. Su Luo used the weak moonlight to sweep a glance at it. Indeed, the handwriting on the contract was Su Wan's. It really was her. So what did she invite you over to do? Kill me? Su Luo calmly slipped that piece of paper into her own bosom. She watched the continuously trembling black-clothed man with a smile that was not quite a smile. No, not that. The black-clothed man somewhat timidly turned his face away. Speak the truth or... Su Luo took out a red heartbreak pill and waved it in front of his face. That action naturally had a threatening overtone. A touch of panic flashed across the black-clothed man's eyes. He stammeringly said, "It is to kill you. However, first, I must rape you before killing you. And also what?" Su Luo's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes had a matchless ice-cold light. "And also, take your corpse and leave it out in the wilderness for wolf dogs to gnaw on." The black-clothed man really didn't want to say it, but under Su Luo's menacing and imposing manner, he didn't dare to hide the truth. He confessed to everything he knew without leaving anything out. First rape, then kill, and then leave the corpse in the wilderness for wolf dogs to gnaw on? Su Wan, Su Wan. Originally I thought your heart was a little malicious, but didn't expect you to have the heart of a snake and the sting of a scorpion. Which time was it not you who first struck at me while I, Su Luo, only passively counterattacked? In all respects I exercised forbearance. But on the contrary, I gave you an inch and you wanted a mile. Could it be that you really think I'm that easy to bully? You were even able to use such a sinister move. Good, very good, excellent. If I don't uproot you this time, then how could I, Su Luo, have peaceful days in this manner from now on? I've only heard of 1,000 nights of being a thief, but never heard of every night guarding against a thief. Since you are so heartless, then don't blame me for being unjust. Su Luo's eyes were full of ice-cold, bone-chilling, murderous intent. This was the first time she had the urge to kill someone. You, the black-clothed man saw Su Luo's expression suddenly change. Immediately, he had a bad kind of premonition. This was a killer's innate kind of intuition, a type of normally terrible intuition. Sure enough, he only saw Su Luo's hand chop down towards him like a knife. In a flash, it knocked the black-clothed man unconscious. Seeing the black-clothed man softly fall to the ground, the corner of Su Luo's mouth lifted into a cold, bloodthirsty sneer. First rape, then kill and expose the corpse to the wilderness, right? Su Wan, since these were the rules you drew up for this game, then let us play according to the rules of your game. But before we start, allow me, your younger sister, to first send you a major gift. The moon hanged on the tip of a willow branch. The night was as cold as water. This was a moonless night with high winds, perfectly suited to commit murder. Su Luo changed into all black clothing, suitable for nocturnal use. She carried the black-clothed man and jumped over the wall. Her delicate and nimble body rushed with great speed in the vast dim night. Su Manor's security was regarded as tight, however. Wherever Su Luo went, not a single guard sensed her existence. Previously, having gone through the process of stealing the celestial spirit water, Su Luo became extremely familiar with the terrain of Su Manor. Chapter 166, The Final Craziness, 8. Su Luo hid in the vast dim night, quickly heading towards Su Wan's hibiscus courtyard. Her acute vision allowed her to see in the night as if it was daytime. Her keen insight and perception of danger to her body allowed her to always be a step ahead in finding patrolling soldiers and avoiding them. Su Luo still hadn't learned the exquisite footwork of the people here, but her ability to hide was something the people here did not possess. Along the way, she was very cautious and prudent. Su Luo very quickly felt her way to Su Wan's hibiscus courtyard. Su Wan's hibiscus courtyard, compared to Su Luo's rundown courtyard, was like night and day. This hibiscus courtyard was close to the main courtyard. The residence was exquisitely designed, paying close attention to luxury and refinement, giving off a gorgeous ornate appearance everywhere. Right now it was already the crack of dawn. According to convention, the oil lamps should have already been snuffed out. However, now in Su Wan's room, a lonely lamp was still lighted. The window had a reflection of Su Wan's clever long silhouette. Su Luo quietly approached. She cautiously and carefully poked through the paper layer of the window. Through the window screen she looked inside. Right now, Su Wan was reclining on a soft couch, on a mental journey exploring the heavens. Her mood was apparently very good. The corner of her mouth would unconsciously expose a joyful smile. At the same time, she also seemed somewhat nervous and expectant. It was unknown what she was happy about, looking forward to, and also what she was nervous about. However, Su Luo seemed to understand her thoughts at this moment. A sneer plastered onto Su Luo's mouth. Su Wan, Su Wan. You should properly enjoy your last moment. After tonight, you will be confronted with this life's most embarrassing day. Moreover, it would never end, and you could never escape from it. Su Luo retrieved that sleeping gas pipe from her space. She originally wanted to return a tooth for a tooth. She wanted to use the black-clothed man's sleeping gas that had been burned halfway. But after further thought, she abandoned this idea. Because that quality really couldn't avoid detection. It had color and smell, and was very likely to be discovered by Su Wan. Therefore, Su Luo, without the slightest hesitation, chose to use Apothecary Lung's product, the colorless, odorless, high-grade sleeping gas. Poking through the window screen, Su Luo slowly blew the sleeping gas into the room. It couldn't be said enough. The sleeping gas's effect was extremely good. In less than a moment, Su Wan felt that her entire body was dry and difficult to endure the heat. The area around her heart seemed to have countless ants nibbling on it. The scratching gave her an oddly incomparable itch that was also abnormally comfortable. This kind of wonderful novel feeling was something she had never encountered before. Her complexion very quickly became scarlet. Both eyes were also very red and glossy. Her vision was blurred. She unconsciously began to peel off her clothing. One piece and another piece. Finally, only a thin undergarment remained. Chapter 167, The Final Craziness 9. Su Luo saw that the time was ripe. The corner of her mouth perked up into a sinisterly cold smirk. Su Wan, the time to enjoy yourself is finally here. Are you ready? Su Luo did not remain hidden. She pushed open the door and directly tossed the unconscious black-clothed man towards Su Wan. Su Wan was hit by the heavy weight. Originally she was very annoyed. However, something fantastic happened when she came into contact with the other person's fervent skin. A hard-to-describe feeling of heat started to rise up from the soles of her feet. Her body tingled, numbed, and itched, but an unusually comfortable feeling also rose. Su Wan was already somewhat delirious now. She was completely immersed in the dreamland of her own weaving. That place was a charming, gentle, and fantastic world. She unconsciously, instinctively, and wildly tore apart the black-clothed man's outer robes. She seemed impatient and urgent. Her movements were wild, coarse, and crude. The black-clothed man, right now, could not be called the black-clothed man. All the clothing on his body from top to bottom had been peeled off by Su Wan. He remained unconscious as he laid on top of Su Wan's soft couch. Su Wan instinctively climbed up on the black-clothed man's body, though she still did not know how to relieve her own body's suffering. The black-clothed man had already inhaled some sleeping gas before, and at the moment, the entire room was filled with hints of sleeping gas. He opened his eyes. They were scarlet red, as if a raging inferno had been ignited. His reasoning had long ago abandoned him. Su Wan was in so much pain that cold sweat kept pouring down. However, no matter what she did, she could not stop the pain. With a taunting smile plastered across her mouth, Su Luo burningly watched this lavish, lively exercise show that was occurring in front of her. Su family's third miss had lost her body's purity to a black-clothed man of unknown origin. If this matter was to spread out, it was indeed something good to look forward to. Such a good-looking action movie was being enacted on the bed. Su Luo was a very generous person. How could she enjoy it alone? Su Luo thoughtfully gathered all the clothing they had taken off aside. The bed sheets, quilted cover, and everything that could be used to cover up the body were all without exception lit on fire by Su Luo. Once the flame rose, the hint of sleeping gas would be swallowed up by the fire. Star-like speckles of flame jumped up, shining upon Su Luo's face, which was suddenly dark then light. At this moment, her expression was hard to see. Because it was all flammable material, the fire rapidly began to expand. Su Luo ultimately left just an ice-cold smile to remember her by. She locked the door, turned around, and flew over the wall. The fire spread endlessly to the surroundings. However, the male and female on the bed, whose bodies were red like fruit, were as tightly intertwined together as before. They were stubbornly pursuing the most primitive joy. The action was explicit and intense, wildly coarse like a bomb setting fire to the earth. They were both totally oblivious to the spreading fire. Nevertheless, this did not mean that other people wouldn't notice. These two people were not the only ones in the hibiscus courtyard. There were many servant girls and old women stationed in the courtyard to wait upon Su Wan. Within the room, the fire was fierce and intense. From the beginning, when the flames were star-like speckles, to when they burst into a violent blaze afterwards, the time that had passed did not exceed the brief period required to burn a stick of incense. A servant girl saw the lively flames in the night, and immediately started to yell out loud, "Fetch water! Fetch water!" Quickly put out the fire. Having been scared out of her mind, the servant let out a penetrating scream that ripped through the quiet night sky. It woke up everyone that was fast asleep. Consequently, each and every one of them, with disheveled hair and without time to properly put on clothing, had all rushed out. Most people in the great General Su's manor practiced martial arts. The patrolling guards had also discovered the particulars over in the courtyard. The captain led the troops and rushed over. They joined the procession of rescuers. Lame kept watch at Su Wan's doorway. Towards the captain of the patrol troops, she anxiously spoke. "Captain Lee, quickly go and save the 3rd Mississippi. The 3rd Miss is still locked inside." Su Wan's door was locked. It may have been melted by the fire into another shape. Therefore, no matter what, Lame was unable to open it. Chapter 168. The Final Craziness 10. Doesn't the 3rd Miss know martial arts? Why is she still in there? The fire inside wasn't that huge. Why was it that the 3rd Miss still hadn't come out? Captain Lee felt this was incomprehensible. "I don't know anyway. There's no time to deal with such matters. Hurry and go save her." Lame was so worried that both of her eyes were red. If something were to happen to the 3rd Miss, and nothing had happened to the servants, the great general would definitely use military punishment to beat them to death. Yet at this moment inside the bedroom, it was a tangled and rushed mess. Because the large fire burned away traces of the toxic sleeping gas. Therefore Su Wan very quickly awoke from the drug's effect. She discovered that her entire body ached. It was so painful that she almost cried out. She bitterly laughed secretly in her heart. She never thought that she could have such an erotic dream. Moreover, such a domineering erotic dream. However, the subsequent rubbing movement thoroughly sobered her up. Afterwards, she abruptly became clear-headed. This was not a dream, but was reality. Moreover, it was still taking place. Su Wan suddenly shrieked loudly. She immediately smashed her fist towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man had temporarily lowered his guard, and was pounded until his head bled. Because of this, he also became clear-headed in an instant. Su Wan and the black-clothed man looked at each other in dismay. This was not the first time they had met, so with just a glance, they recognized each other. You, why is it that you are here?" Both of Su Wan's hands covered her chest, wanting to wail loudly. She wanted to scream loudly at the sky, but discovered that apart from leaking out a line of tears, she could do nothing else. Her right now had lost her head from fear, almost to the point of falling apart. She actually... Oh heavens! Who could come and tell her? What kind of situation was this? How could it turn out like this? The black-clothed man's mind slowly recalled the scenes starting from last night. He took on the task to harm Su Manor's 4th Miss, but who would have thought that he would be captured by her? Afterwards, what happened afterwards? Just when the black-clothed man was holding his head in pain trying to remember, Su-won severely swung at him with the palm of her hand. "You idiot! Bastard! Hoodlum! I spent money for you to rape Su Luo. Why did you come and find me? I already told you I am the Su family's third miss, the third miss." Su-won was about to collapse, and was on the verge of passing out. The black-clothed man originally thought to retort back, but he discovered that it was best he didn't retort back. At the doorway, when everyone heard Su-won's sharp cries of fear, they were all terrified until their complexion went pale. La Mei's shouting and continuous banging on the door became even more urgent. Miss, are you all right? Quickly come out." Patrol Captain Lee used his body to bang against the door unceasingly. The not-so-solid door issued a sound of being rammed. Tottering on the verge of collapse, it was as if in the next second, it would broke apart from the ramming. A trace of terror flashed across Su-won's heart. She was itching to choke the black-clothed man to death, but right now, Su-won saw the continuously spreading fire. A threat of alarm flashed across her head, and she loudly yelled, "Quickly get out! You quickly get the fuck out! Run for it!" If the people knocked down the door, came in and saw them like this, then the consequences. Just thinking about it, Su-won became extremely dismayed. But the black-clothed man saw the scarlet fingernail scratches left on his naked body, and also became anxious immediately afterwards. "Where are the clothes?" Su-won anxiously shouted. However, no matter how much she looked, even when she checked under the bed, she still couldn't find a single stitch of clothing. Moreover, the matter more insulting than there being no clothes was that she couldn't even find any embroidered bed sheets. Chapter 169, Schemes Within a Scheme 1. Go? Where can I go? The black-clothed man had a tense expression. He looked around in panic. What made him feel the most despair was that any cloth in the room that could be used for cover was without exception all set on fire. Even the tablecloth was not exempted. Su-won was also equally desperate. She anxiously and urgently paced back and forth in the room. Suddenly, she saw the intact wardrobe and immediately beckoned to the black-clothed man. Quickly hide in there." The black-clothed man by now had already lost his head from fear. Seeing a wardrobe where he could hide, without having to think, he went in. At this time, more and more people surrounded the courtyard. Finally, even Su Zian was startled enough to come over with large strides and an icy expression. He saw the bustling crowd of people and commanded, "What are you guys standing around for? Where is the third miss?" After Captain Lee saluted to Su Zian, he hurriedly said, "The third miss should still be inside. Just now we heard her voice. Move back." Su Zian gave a cold grunt. Both hands only used 30% strength, before a snap and cracking sounds could be heard. Afterwards, with a bang, the door that was heated scarlet red was pushed open. Inside the room, Su-won was so anxious that she nearly started to hop about. She wanted to loudly shout at them to stop, telling them not to come in. However, on second thought, the fire was becoming more and more intense. In the end, she still had to get out. After hearing the crashing sounds of the door, Su-won became extremely anxious. Without thinking, with a swoosh sound, she also went into the wardrobe. With a bang sound, she slammed the wardrobe's door close. Now, Su-won made the same mistake as before when she jumped into the lotus pond. Whenever Su Luo did a job, she always thought through the next 3 or 4 steps. However, Su-won could only think about the present predicament and could not imagine the second step, the third step. Consequently, this determined her doomed tragedy. With a loud bang, the door was knocked open. Because of the violent shaking, the thick and solid beam on top of the room could not support its own weight. With a loud rumble, it collapsed. Such a small change caused a butterfly effect. People only heard a violent crashing sound, a fiery ball of spark radiating all around. Finally, the thick and solid beam smashed down on top of the wardrobe. The 2 people within the wardrobe were pounded until they started to bitch endlessly. They were knocked around until they became dizzy and could only hear rumbling sounds in their ears. However, this was just the beginning of their tragedy. In the beginning, Su-won had selected this wardrobe mainly because it was somewhat far from the starting place of the fire and could not easily catch on fire. However, after being smashed by the already burning beam, the fire rapidly spread towards the wardrobe. Yet, Su Wan and the black-clothed man hidden inside were still unaware of the danger. They still believed that they were very safe. Su Zian did not realize the strength he used to push open the door was excessive and had brought enormous trouble to Su Wan. He was the first to step into the room, continuously fanning away the black smoke and loudly calling, Wanner, quickly come out. Even though recently, Su Wan had time after time disappointed Su Zian, but blood was thicker than water. In addition, Su Wan had continuously and painstakingly fawned on Su Zian to win his favor. Therefore, Su Zian still had a little father and daughter mutual affection towards her. How could Su Zian look on unfeelingly as Su Wan met with such a mishap? Thus, he entered the room together with Captain Li. Everyone was shouting out Su Wan's name continuously. The intensity of the fire inside was already hard to contain. Fire was everywhere, and there was also thick smoke everywhere. The thick smoke rolled on surrounded by flames. And the temperature was also extremely high. Standing inside was like being inside of a steamer. It was so hot that it made a person's entire body become drenched in sweat. The black smoke made the eyes astringent and ache, exceptionally difficult to bear. Wanner. He continuously called out Su Wan's name. His heart became uneasy. Could it be that Wan child had already met with a mishap? Wanner. The direct translation for is child or son. In this case it's used as an affectionate nickname, like saying Danny instead of Dan. So from now on we'll just use Wanner instead of Wan child, which I personally like since it showed more affection. Chapter 170. Schemes within a scheme 2. Third Miss, where are you? Captain Li and his subordinates were all dispersed in the room, searching for her in a block pattern. However, what made them despair even more was that within this condemned room, how had Su Wan disappeared into thin air? But they were quite certain Su Wan should be in this room. This was because at the beginning, they had heard the sounds of her screaming. Master, look here this. Captain Li pointed at the mess on top of the soft couch. His expression was heavy with incomprehensible misgivings. Su Zian followed his gaze and looked. Immediately traces of rage flashed through his eyes. On top of that soft couch was some scarlet blood and disheveled ceasings. It was clearly in complete shambles. At a glance, a perceptive person could obviously recognize what happened. The muscles on Su Zian's face twitched uncontrollably. Both of his eyes had combusted into a raging inferno. His pair of hands clenched tightly into fists. The blue veins on the back of the hands throbbed with his heartbeats. Impossible. This was definitely not possible. His Wanner would never ruin the family's traditions by doing such things. Now, Su Wan was also feeling uncomfortable within the wardrobe. In the wake of the fire getting more and more intense, the black smoke within the room had also become more dense. The air became thinner and was very scarce. On top of that, they were shut within the wardrobe where the air was even more pitifully thin. She could still deal with the thin air. But the more terrifying thing was the thick smoke. It was coming in through the thin crack, and the entire wardrobe was filled with smoke from the fire. It was suffocating her, until she almost couldn't bear it any longer. What made Su Wan more depressed was that the surroundings of the wardrobe had also caught fire. The fire was fierce, making the temperature suddenly soar up. Outside of the wardrobe was a flaming fire. Inside the wardrobe, both of them were like roasted suckling pigs in an oven. They were being baked until they almost passed out. Su Wan endured and continued to endure. At last, she could not bear it any longer and loudly started to cough. The loud sound of fierce coughing echoed in the quietness of the indoors and broke the silence. Without waiting for Su Zian's orders, Captain Li took his subordinates and rushed towards the sound's origin. They manually removed the beam on top and quickly opened the wardrobe. The wardrobe was opened and they both rolled out. Cough, 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 cough. Su Wan, who was lying on the ground, could actually breathe in fresh air. She desperately breathed it in deeply, resulting in it choking part of her lungs. Her coughing became increasingly severe. The black-clothed man was also lying on his back on the ground, gasping large breaths of air. Now his vital energy seemed incredibly weak, completely different from his strong manner of an expert martial artist before. Su Zian, including everyone present, were all dumbstruck by the scene in front of their eyes. This strange picture had surpassed all of its predecessors and had no successors. Captain Li, at a glance, could recognize that naked person as the third Miss Su Wan. He was absolutely sure. The raging fire continued to burn on top of the soft couch. If everything was put together, it was enough to give everyone unlimited space to imagine what occurred. Su Wan lifted her head, saw her father and everyone's figures. She lost her mind from fear, subconsciously placing both hands over her bosom, and shrieked loudly. How could there be so many people? Furthermore, even her father was amongst the crowd? Her body? Oh heavens! Right now, Su Wan wished that she could immediately pass out, pretending as if nothing had happened. If she was to do so now, it was obvious already too late. Su Zian was so enraged that both of his eyes were about to explode. His entire body was shaking, itching to use his fist to kill this daughter. This daughter who was without a sense of honor and brought ruin to the family traditions. 1. See Chapter 169 for the footnote. Wanner is an affectionate nickname. Chapter 171. Schemes within a scheme. 3. Under the light from the flames, his formerly mighty face was suddenly bright then gloomy. It was as black as the bottom of a pot. His mood was unclear and indistinguishable. However, the people closest to him could clearly feel the approaching storm clouds reeking of blood. It was quite obvious, the great General Su Zian's fury was already at the peak. Right now, Su Zian was itching to choke this living daughter Su Wan to death. He would rather have never had such a disgraceful daughter. If this were to spread out, afterwards, where could they place Su Manor's face? However, in the presence of so many people, Su Zian only clenched his fists tightly, and his complexion was ashen. Su Zian ultimately said nothing, only his face was dark. The temple on his forehead bulged and throbbed incessantly. Both of his eyes were hazed over with bloodlust. He swept a quick glance at the surrounding people. People that were swept by his machine gun-like gaze. Each and every one of them kept quiet out of fear. They reverently lowered their eyes. Even the sound of their breathing was slowed down. Today's matter, if anyone dares to mention it, they will be killed without a chance of being pardoned. A heavy murderous intent flashed through Su Zian's eyes. Su Manor doesn't only have Su Wan as the only unwed daughter. If today's matter were to spread outside, how could the other daughters henceforth get married? Not to mention the daughter preparing to wed the crown prince, to become the crown prince's imperial concubine. Su Shi? Deal with this. Su Zian scornfully and disdainfully glared at the two weak figures on the floor in front of him. After he finished speaking, Su Zian tossed his sleeves and left. His footsteps were firm and decisive. Captain Li, who had stood behind the general since the beginning, looked at Su Wan crying uncontrollably on the floor with a complex expression. The third Su family miss was graceful, noble and incomparably beautiful. He would admire her daily numerous times. Now that he saw this disgusting side of hers, he finally realized. It turned out she was this kind of fickle and loose woman. He subconsciously took off the cloak from his own body and gently placed it on top of Su Wan's body. Su Wan appeared to be grabbing at the last straw that could save her life. Her cries were mournful and intense. I am innocent. I have been wrongly accused. It's Su Luo. It's Su Luo, that slut who framed me. It is her who harmed me. With the light from the flames, her appearance was sinister and twisted. Her pair of eyes were scarlet red, filled with maliciousness, and were very spiteful. She had a crazy expression like a mentally deranged fool. Her condition was terrifying, like a lunatic. In a short while, Captain Li's original feelings of pity dropped by more than half. He calmly said, "Third Miss, rest assured, the general will use his own wise judgment." Captain Li held Su Wan, who was tightly wrapped with his cloak, with a complex expression on his face, as he left with her. Deal with this. Captain Li left only these 3 words. People could only see the swords in the soldiers' hands swing down. Slice after slice appeared on the black-clothed person's body. Fresh blood sprayed out wildly, continuously spraying out. Soon, his corpse was kicked into the raging fire, and afterwards, was cremated into black smoke. as if he had never existed before. Captain Li's troops followed behind him, and also filed out. Within a moment, everyone walked out, leaving behind a completely empty courtyard. The same evening, the night was pitch black as ink. Su Zian sat inside his study. The lamp flickered brightly then darkened. It shined upon his hazy and fierce appearance, revealing a ruthless expression. His overcast mood was clearly indeterminable. Madame Su came in, holding a bowl of lotus seed soup. Seeing Su Zian's unstable mood and absent-minded appearance, she sighed. The passing years seemed to have left no traces on her face. "General, you haven't eaten anything tonight. You should eat something at least." Madame Su's voice was gentle and sweet-sounding, very pleasant to listen to. "Not eating, take it away." Su Zian frowned and stubbornly refused. Chapter 172. Schemes within a scheme 4. Is the general's spirit still wounded with regards to Wanner's matter? Madame Su softly asked. Ah. Su Zian let out a strong sound of agreement. No matter what was said, that was a daughter he had seen growing up from childhood. After all, blood was thicker than water. At that time, he was furious and in a difficult position. He had to consider the reputation of the Su family clan. Thus he was itching to put Wanner to death. However, now after much careful reflection, there seemed to be many fishy occurrences in this matter. Madame Su was the most adept at discerning his thoughts from his body language. With one glance, she could tell what Su Zian was thinking. She followed with a sigh. Her expression was disappointed and frustrated. "General, this matter was rather too odd. Can't say for sure. Maybe Wanner was wrongfully accused." Madame Su knew that this was what Su Zian was thinking, so she deliberately said it this way. She made it appear as if she happened to hold the same opinion as him, just as if their two hearts beat as one. Sure enough, Su Zian's pair of eyes opened wide. "You think so too?" "Yes, the more this wife thought about it, the more I don't understand. How could Wanner do something like this? Normally, Wanner is gentle, soft and dignified. She knows her etiquette and understands human interactions. Even if she was birthed by a concubine, when everyone mentions the Su family's third miss, they would express the sound of their approval and praise. You tell me, this kind of Wanner, how could she do such a thing that dishonors the family traditions?" "You mean this matter has some hidden secrets?" Su Zian's appearance changed slightly. He indeed had some suspicions. He was suffering from a lack of evidence. Yes, this wife feels that Wanner's matter. Someone secretly set this up to frame her. Madame Su's eyes were black as ink, so deep as to be bottomless. Every one of her sentences was ordinary, but step by step, it controlled Su Zian's mood, leading him in the direction she desired. Madame Su, for so many years, was unstoppably favored, making Su Zian trust her unconditionally. It was impossible without her having some outstanding talent. This type of imperceptible influence, like the breeze amongst the drizzling rain, was her strength. Framed, Su Zian suddenly stood up. He impatiently paced around the room. He continuously rubbed both hands, displaying his heart's unease and worries. Yes, it should be a setup. Madame Su's appearance was equitable with a slight frown. See, how on earth can there be such coincidences? The black-clothed man could so coincidentally enter Wanner's courtyard? Once the fire started, why was it that both of them did not discover it? The fire burned their clothing and beddings. They still didn't feel it? This seems fishy, enormously wrong. Su Zian slapped his hands. Correct, at that time, he was so furious he became confused. How could he not realize the truth of such a simple matter? Granted, even under an extremely passionate embrace, the fire was quickly spreading towards their butts. Why didn't they extinguish the fire? Why didn't they run away earlier? Ultimately, they were trapped in the room, waiting for people to catch the couple in the act? This was simply impossible. What Madame said was right, this matter was extremely fishy. Su Zian's pair of thick eyebrows knotted tightly. His expression was serious. His eyes bursting with flames hatefully said, "Who framed Wanner? If this general were to find out, then I will have him dismembered into 10,000 pieces." Under his raging temper, Su Zian slapped down his hand. The table made of pear flour would immediately turn to dust. Now his expression had hazed over. Both eyes were murderous and radiating with violence. Madame Su pondered for a short while. Afterwards, she frowned slightly and slowly said, Juana has always been well behaved and abided by etiquette. She never had a dispute with another person and never incurred other people's hatred. Why would someone frame her? Su Zian only coldly smiled. You only know the well-behaved and proper Juana, but you don't know how arrogant and despotic she is behind people's back. Let's not talk about outsiders, just talking about how she treats Luo'er. Chapter 173. Schemes within a scheme. 5. Suddenly, Su Zian's expression changed and his speech abruptly stopped. It was not that Su Wan had no enemies. She and Su Luo definitely had old grievances. Moreover, their relationship was very strained. Last time, Juana had slandered Luo'er and had even dragged him over to investigate. It was tough to say if Luo'er would not harbor hard feelings. When Su Zian thought of this, his expression indeterminately cycled between overcast and clear. He was immersed in his own world, completely unaware of Madame Su nearby. The corner of her mouth lifted into an obvious smiling expression. Madame Su had spent a lot of effort to make Su Zian fix his suspicion on Su Luo. She would naturally continue to persist. He only saw her frown and quietly said, Luo'er, it shouldn't be? They are both siblings, how could they have enmity? It's not that this wife is biased. Rather, Luo'er's natural disposition is timid and gutless. Furthermore, she doesn't even have any spirit strength. Then how could she possibly frame Juana? Su Zian waved his hand. His wife was too kind-hearted. She never thought that people could be bad. How could she be aware of the sinisterness of people's hearts? He already knew that Luo'er and Juana had a feud between them. As to Luo'er's natural timid and gutless disposition, in Su Zian's mind suddenly appeared the scenarios from the recent few times he saw Su Luo. The Su Luo before was perhaps really gutless, low profile and timid. However, that day when the Crown Prince came to withdraw the engagement, her behavior was completely without inferiority nor weakness. On the contrary, she even dared to provoke the Crown Prince. On top of that, adding that recent matter, when she was wrongly accused by Juana, afterward she was neither servile nor overbearing. She was rational and acted accordingly to help herself refute the accusations. Her words were sharp. Every sentence was reasonable. Even he himself was choked off by her. Was this Su Luo really that low-profile and timid Su Luo from his wife's mouth? Apart from not having any spirit strength, her temperament compared to before was simply changed beyond recognition. Madame Su saw Su Zian's brows knot tightly, and she laughed grimly in her heart. Her face, however, didn't even bat an eyelid and said, General, Juana was incriminated and framed to such an extent. Her later life has already been ruined. You shouldn't also ruin Luo'er. Even if we consider this matter to be done by Luo'er, we should also pretend as if we saw nothing. After being married for many years, Madame Su could accurately grasp Su Zian's pulse. These kind of words, she used retreat to advance. As expected, Su Zian did not disappoint her. How could this be allowed? Absolutely out of the question. Su Zian had an indifferent expression, not allowing another opinion, and said, If this matter was indeed Su Luo's doing, then she must pay the price for this matter. This general absolutely will not be swayed, even a little bit, by personal relationship. Come! Su Zian loudly roared. The imperial bodyguards keeping watch at the doorway immediately came in. From the black-clothed man's person, start to investigate. You must investigate this thoroughly until it becomes clear. Su Zian loudly commanded. No, this matter must not be investigated openly. You need to remember to investigate this secretly. Absolutely cannot check on this with great fanfare. Yes, sir. ZMO bowed, accepted the order and left. The suspicion was already planted. She just needed to wait for it to grow roots and bud. Madame Su looked at Su Zian's gloomy expression. Her mood actually became very good. She returned to the main house. Her mood was exceptionally good, and she ate an extra bowl of lotus seed soup. At Madame Su's side, Nanny Zhao flatteringly moved close to her, lowered her voice and said, Madam, I have already sent down the instructions. They will make their move tonight. Madame Su smiled a smile that was not quite a smile and said, Fine, remember, this matter must be done carefully. Not even a bit of sound should be leaked out. Seeing the back of the leaving Nanny Zhao, a crazy and cruel light flashed through Madame Su's eyes. These concubines' daughters, seeing even one of them offends her, made her feel sick. Chapter 174. Schemes within a scheme. 6. Their existence repeatedly reminded her of Su Xian's unfaithfulness to her. Formerly, in order to preserve her face, she could tolerate them hanging around in front of her eyes. However, now that Su Wan was already ruined for the greater part, she could ignore her. For the rest of Su Wan's life, she wouldn't be able to crawl back up. However, she still had a final worth that could be exploited. Right now, only Su Luo was left. Thinking of Su Luo, the maliciousness in Madame Su's eyes became even more intense. Back then, when the general admitted that woman into Su Manor, every day, they were a loving, affectionate couple, and that woman had been unfailingly favored. If it weren't for her finally taking action to personally put that woman to death, maybe the position of the general's wife would already be that slut's. She didn't know if Su Luo's, that little slut's daughter, luck could be considered good or bad. If Su Luo had grown to look somewhat like that little slut, then Madame Su would have already taken action to have her killed. Maybe it was also because Su Luo did not grow to look like that little slut, so she could not obtain the general's favor. If it weren't for the fact that she was a girl, she would really be suspicious that the child had been switched by that slut. There were actually mother-daughter pairs that grew up to look completely different. It was truly hard for people to believe. Madame Su leisurely and unworriedly sampled the fragrant tea. Whenever she thought about how she would get rid of both concubines' daughters in one shot, her mood became extremely carefree. That same night, the night was pitch black like ink. In Su Luo's dilapidated courtyard, Su Luo was not affected at all by Su Wan's incident. She also had no idea that she was being targeted by Madame Su. As before, she continued to sleep, regardless of day or night, sleeping from when twilight lighted up the sky to the darkness of the night. Meanwhile, her spirit was in her space, arduously practicing to cultivate the great dimensional imprint. Ever since she last used it on the black-clothed man, Su Luo was extremely optimistic about this great dimensional imprint. She continuously engaged in practice drills, and now, that originally tadpole-sized little black dot had grown a lot. This time, when it was condensed out, it was the size of an apple. Su Luo experimented with it. The power compared to when she had previously used the little black dot had as much as doubled. This discovery immediately made her ecstatic. However, at the same time, she was also grieved to discover that her crystal stones had almost all been consumed. The source stones taken from Elder Zihua's cave at that time were peeled open by the adorable little dragon. Afterwards, the majority of the top-notch crystal stones were then used to save Nangong Liuyun's life. By then, only a few tiny pieces remained in her hand. Moreover, these few pieces were not exclusively for her use. She had to leave some for the adorable little dragon to eat as snacks. Su Luo discovered that the adorable little dragon could also grow and advance in levels through gobbling up the crystal stones. Therefore, what she now lacked the most were crystal stones. If she had more crystal stones, then the speed of her cultivation would advance by leaps and bounds. If she didn't have crystal stones, then her cultivation speed would greatly decrease and eventually become stagnant. However, how could crystal stones be so easy to obtain? Couldn't you see that all those great influential families were reluctant to use it? If she were to buy it, the price would simply scare her to death. Therefore, the only method was to gamble on source stones. However, Su Luo sighed. Currently, she was absolutely the poorest beggar among beggars. Because from the top to the bottom of her body, she didn't even have a single gold coin. Without gold coins, how could she go and gamble on stones? It truly was that a single monetary coin could confound a hero. Su Luo tossed and turned on her bed, having a hard time falling asleep. She continuously pondered on how to earn her first pot of gold. Once she had her first pot of gold, then relying on the adorable little dragon's ability to find treasures, she would absolutely win a bundle from gambling stones. Nobody would be able to match her success rate. The night gradually became darker. All around, not a sound could be heard. There were only the sounds from the blowing wind passing by. All of a sudden, the adorable little dragon appeared. Who knew from which hole he popped out of? In his mouth, he had a sparkling and shiny thing. Chapter 175. Schemes within a scheme. 7. Su Luo snatched it away and looked at it. Immediately she was struck dumb. Could it be that the gods especially favored her? Was she really the bastard daughter of the goddess of fortune? At this moment, even she herself somewhat believed it. The thing being held in the adorable little dragon's mouth was none other than a gold coin. It glittered with golden light, authentic looking. It was a gold coin cast by the imperial government. What was strange was that this gold coin had some moist soil on it. Where did it come from? Is there more? Su Luo turned over and got off her bed, and in high spirits, held the adorable little dragon. She poked at his head. This baby was simply too cute. Every time she landed in a predicament, he would always lend a helping hand. Su Luo discovered that he had astonishing insight with regards to treasures. In a nutshell, he had the instinctual ability to hunt down treasure. Within the range of his body's ability, as long as there was a treasure, it wasn't capable of escaping his exceptionally sensitive nose. He could actually find a gold coin in this dilapidated little courtyard. His ability was really too formidable. Awa, both of the adorable little dragon's eyes shone. He bit Su Luo's trouser leg, indicating that she should follow after him. This gold coin had moist soil on it. Quite clearly, it had been dug out of the ground. Could this dilapidated little courtyard really have some buried gold coins? Countless questions flashed through Su Luo's heart. Her footsteps automatically followed after the adorable little dragon, leaving him ahead to show the way. The little thing only ran for a short while before stopping. He lowered his head towards the little hole and started wailing awu. Here, there was a huge locust tree, and it was also in Su Luo's courtyard. Su Luo went closer and looked. Both of her eyes shone like the adorable little dragon's. Sparkling, shining gold coins were piled full in a trunk. She visually estimated that there were about 10,000 gold coins in there. How could there be so many gold coins in this place? Su Luo did not let the riches go to her head. She continued to think, and felt that something about this seemed fishy. She cautiously picked up some soil, and placed it under her nose to carefully sniff at. Again, she picked up that single gold coin to scrupulously examine it. There was no problem with the soil, nor any problem with the gold coin, however. When Su Luo saw the number for the year on the back of the gold coin, her mouth hooked into a non-existent cold smile. The wooden trunk was clearly made to look old. It even had a faint odor of decay. Everything about this seemed to indicate that this wooden trunk had been buried for a long time. However, the year on the back of the gold coin, it was actually cast this year. How could it be possible? In her courtyard, a pile of gold coins of unknown origins had appeared. For what purpose? Who arranged this? Also, who had designs on her? Su Luo looked at these gold coins, her mouth curving into a very dangerous sneer. These gold coins, it was a waste to not take it. Su Luo had originally thought to place all these gold coins within her space. However, she suddenly recalled the previous time when she was being chased by Air Huang. The space matter. She should still be more cautious of such a wonderful thing. If she was not careful and other people found out, then she would never experience another peaceful day. As a result, Su Luo deliberately made a few round trips. She slowly moved the gold coins in small batches into her own courtyard. Finally, she took a shovel and filled the little hole, then flattened it, restoring it to the previous condition. Behind the wall, a sharp pair of eyes silently gazed at Su Luo, watching her when she discovered those gold coins, and her eyes shone with greed. Then, watched her as she split the gold coins into small batches to be carried away time after time. Her eyes flashed with a sinister radiance. A cruel and cold smirk emerged at the corner of her mouth. Afterwards, she quietly turned and left. One could only see her figure rapidly flash by and quickly arrive at a dignified and grand courtyard. This was the central housing where Madame Su resided. Chapter 176. Irrefutable Evidence, Reporting Back to Madame. The fourth miss really did dig out all the gold coins and take it back. She didn't leave a single gold coin behind. The mysterious young woman who was standing in front of Madame Su stated with reverence. Very good, continue to keep a close watch on her. You absolutely must not give her the chance to ship out all the gold coins. Madame Su's beautiful eyes had a cruel and evil smile within them. Su Luo, as expected, was still too inferior to be shown in public. She could be taken in by only a little bit of gold coins. Ha ha, Su Luo, ah Su Luo. These 10,000 gold coins. You should take it as accompaniment for your burial. In any case, you won't be able to live for much longer. Whenever Madame Su recalled that after this matter was settled, she would never see these two concubines' daughters, her mood would be especially good. The corner of her mouth tilted into a joyful arc. After a few days passed in a row, those days were all very tranquil. On this day in the study, Su Zian looked at the results of his investigation. His sharp eyebrows was deeply wrinkled, and his complexion was exceptionally ugly. On top of the thick pile of investigation reports, it was neatly and clearly written that Su Wan's matter was related to Su Luo and linked to her in countless ways. Su Luo had the motive to harm her, because previously, Su Wan was aiming for her, therefore Su Luo harbored hard feelings. It was to the extent that she would take her revenge against Su Wan. Moreover, on this investigative report, it had included strong conclusive proof. Su Luo had actually issued a task at the mercenary union, and the details of the task was for a man to go rape Su Manor's third miss, Su Wan. Seeing the flamboyant handwriting on the contract, Su Zian's calm expression was abruptly covered with dark clouds. This was Su Luo's handwriting, there was no mistake. Originally, he would not be able to recognize it, but the previous time, he had glanced at those sacred scriptures which Su Luo had copied for him. He discovered that Su Luo's letters were unexpectedly strong and energetic, so he had an impression of her handwriting. Madame Su looked at the great General Su, and again looked at the black and white investigative report. She frowned and softly said, "Is this investigative report true? This wife feels that no matter how bad Luo's heart was, she could not do this. General, you mustn't so easily make a decision, okay? That's because you are too kind-hearted. You simply do not understand the viciousness of a person's heart, madam." After Su Zian consoled Madame Su, speaking of Su Luo, his complexion became ashen. His eyes were like two flames leaping out. The investigative report was personally inspected by your husband. How could it be false? Madame Su's expression remained calm and collected. Secretly, she disagreed while sneering repeatedly in her heart. How could it not be false? This investigative report was undoubtedly manipulated from behind the scenes by her. She could absolutely prove that this investigative report was completely false. However, as the boss that pulled the strings from behind him, Madame Su was naturally not stupid enough to say it out loud. Moreover, she had to add more oil and vinegar to inflame Su Zian's rage even more. But Luo or she should be unlikely do it. Humph. Come. Go tie up Su Luo for this general, and bring her to the main hall. Su Zian raised his head and angrily commanded, "This matter must be made clear, otherwise, keeping such a ruthless-minded girl. Then Su Manor wouldn't get to pass a single good day." Inside the main hall, on top of a luxurious, beautiful imperial-style chair was Su Zian, with his eyebrows knotted and looking coldly solemn. He sat on the seat of honor with awe-inspiring dignity. Madame Su, with an amiable expression, sat by his side. Her delicate face had a faintly worried and helpless expression. Su Jingyu stood under them. His serene appearance made it hard to see his expression. Su Luo was brought to the main hall by guards. "Treacherous woman, quickly kneel down." Su Zian's ice-cold voice lacked even a trace of heat. His eyes seemed to harbor two flames. Su Luo's thin eyebrows wrinkled slightly, conforming with the norms of society. She made her salutations. Afterwards, her eyes swept around and with a light voice asked, "Daddy," adopting this pose for the situation, and also used such a heavy hand to invite daughter to come. "Don't know what you have to instruct?" Chapter 177. 100 Mouths Can't Be Refuted. 1. Su Zian's face was dignified. There was no sign of anger due to his position. His eyes were ice-cold without a trace of warmth. "Loathsome girl, what more do you have to say?" Su Luo's expression did not change. but her heart secretly became alert. Able to make Su Zian this angry, it really was not easy, but she really didn't know what matter they were yelling about. She had an indifferent and calm expression, and without any waves of alarm asked, "Daddy, what are you angry about?" To have done such a thing, and afterwards still able to use completely unfeeling and unsuspecting eyes to look at him. Su Zian furiously growled, "Speak. Your third older sister's matter, wasn't it caused by you? So it was Su Wan's matter?" Su Luo's mind flashed with traces of misgivings. She remembered very clearly, when she started the fire, there weren't any witnesses nor evidence to prove she did it. So her cheap father made a solemn vow and placed the criminal charges on her body. Could it be that he was scaring her? Su Luo flashed a pair of bewildered pitch-black eyes, with a confused expression. "Third sister's matter? How could I have done it? Daddy, you also couldn't help looking at me with too high of a regard?" Currently she was weak but remained standing. Her brows were without a trace of guilty conscience, and she looked at a loss. It also looked incredulous. She acted not too cold nor too hot, but just right. Su Zian gave a heavy and cold grunt. With a scattering sound, he threw a stack of papers towards Su Luo where it rained over her. The paper from Chung Xiantang, 1, were sharp. Its edges were as sharp as a knife. If not careful, her delicate cheeks would very easily be cut. Su Luo avoided it without batting an eye, and with poise, she picked up the scattered papers from the ground. She collected all of it together in her hand and flipped through it page by page. Her happy and content expression, flipping through the pages of a book as if nobody was there. She took this place as if it was a library, and not a court where cases were trialed. Simply so arrogant that no one else mattered. Su Zian held back a breath full of anger in his chest. It couldn't go up nor down. He really held it back until he was red in the face. His pair of bell-shaped eyes unwaveringly stared at Su Luo. After looking through it page by page, Su Luo held that stack of paper in her hands. She lifted her eyes and looked towards Su Zian, eyes sparkling with radiance. "Daddy, you trust the words on this report?" "Humph." Su Zian gave a heavy snort. "Now what more do you have to say?" He had already voiced his meaning very clearly. He believed in this investigation report, and he had 100,000% confidence in it. Su Jingyu's expression was indifferent. His treacherous eyes stared at Su Luo. His face was full of endless condemnation. "Su Luo, how could you do such a vicious and ruthless thing? Even if Wanner was in the wrong, she is still your big sister. You did such a thing, which has already ruined the rest of Wanner's life. Haven't you realized it?" Su Luo's gaze blandly shot towards Su Jingyu. If he hadn't said anything, she would have forgotten this older brother. Madame Su, who was nearby, tenderly and softly scolded. "Jingyu, how could you speak? Everything is to be decided by your father." Madame Su worriedly looked at Su Luo. Luo, don't be afraid. This matter may have been started by somebody spreading rumors to create trouble. As long as you say what you know, your father would not treat you unjustly." Su Luo's facial expression did not change, but she secretly sneered in her heart. Madame Su had such a smooth-talking mouth. Even though on the surface, she chided Su Jingyu and appeared to appease her. However, every word and every sentence did not deviate from her cheap dad. She deliberately tried to provoke his rage, just waiting for it to explode. Masterful, she really was a master. Su Zian indeed followed her expectations and heavily slapped his armrest. "Su Luo, do you admit it or not? 1. Chung Xiantang is one of the best quality and durable paper made by Hans during the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms era." Chapter 178. 100 mouths can't be refuted too. If she were to admit to this charge, Su Luo knew it would not be as simple as just being driven out of Su Manor. According to Madame Su's methods, how could she let Su Luo live? Furthermore, carrying this type of charge, how could it sound well? Su Luo was not an idiot. She naturally would not admit to it. When she had acted on this matter, she had clearly understood and envisioned all the causes and effects step by step. However, she simply could not have imagined that Madame Su would insert herself into this matter from another direction, to the extent that it had made this simple matter unexpectedly more complex. Anyway, it didn't matter. She wanted to properly contend with Madame Su, to take a look at the latter's abilities. I didn't do it. How would I admit to it? Admit to what? Su Luo was neither servile nor overbearing. Her expression was tranquil and calm. Still a dead duck, being reluctant to admit to your mistake. On the contrary, Su Zian was so infuriated that he started to laugh. Good. Since you are so reluctant to admit to your mistake, then let the witness approach. Let's see how you will object. Come, let Mr. Mo approach. Su Zian's cold and sober gaze stared at Su Luo. His eyes were full of murderous intent that was almost about to overflow. Mr. Mo was about 50 years old, clothed in a medium-class light garment. He had a sharp mouth and monkey cheeks, a pair of eyes that spun and darted around, giving off a shrewd light. Allowing this type of man to testify? Cynical light flashed through Su Luo's eyes. Mr. Mo, what happened that day? You should carefully tell us. Su Zian, in order to ferret out the troublemaker Su Luo with regards to this matter, had become somewhat devilishly insane. Mr. Mo was the overseer at the mercenary union. The release of assignments was managed by him. Mr. Mo gazed straight ahead, after deferentially giving Su Zian a salute, then clearly stated, reporting to the venerable general, in accordance with the mercenary union's rules, it's not allowed to casually leak out a customer's information. However, since it is the great general who demanded the investigation, the mercenary union would not dare do anything but to cooperate. Okay, do not hesitate to speak. This general will naturally go greet your union's president. Su Zian waved his hands, indicating that he relax his mind and simply just speak. Yes. Mr. Mo's eyes dropped and respectfully said, on that day, a lady came to issue a task with rewards. The great general also knows the mercenary union allows any task to be released. Only it remains to be seen if anyone dares to take it. When that lady's task appeared, almost no one dared to take it. But a member in desperate need of money finally took on the task. What was the task? Su Zian duly asked. Mr. Mo hesitated for a short time. He stole a glance at Su Luo, with a sly spirited appearance of wanting to speak, but not daring to do so. Finally, as if he had decided at last, he determinedly, tightly clenched his fists. His expression became very serious, and his tone following after became more cautious. It's to tarnish Su family's third miss. The lady that issued the task. Who is it? Su Zian gritted his teeth and asked Mr. Mo, emphasizing every word. His pair of eyes, which was bursting with a millennium-old ice that were like swords, was fixated on Su Luo. He inwardly guessed, the unsophisticated Su Luo. In this kind of situation, no matter how she tried to disguise it, she was bound to lose her head out of fear. However, what made him disappointed was not only did Su Luo not panic, but her expression was like before, without a ripple or a wave. That pair of pitch-black eyes even had a curious radiance. What was she curious about? Shouldn't she be more apprehensive? Su Zian was speechless. Su Jingyu and Madame Su's hearts inwardly became alert. Originally they thought that Su Luo, this loathsome girl, would be easy to deal with, however now, it seemed as if it would be a little troublesome. Su Luo's eyes narrowed. She laughed grimly, and repeatedly in her heart. It really was indeed a bother to them. In order to deal with her, they enacted such a brilliant play in front of her. Chapter 179. 100 mouths can't be refuted. 3. She pitied her cheap father, who believed everything was under his control. How would he know he was merely a blade in another's hand? He was the borrowed knife, used to help another to kill her. Not only did he not know, but he even believed himself to be infallible. He truly was pathetic, but someone who was pitiful could also have a hateful aspect. Bystanders might not have noticed, but Su Luo, who always observed everything thoroughly, noticed. When Mr. Mo was speaking, his gaze would occasionally shoot towards Nanny Zhao at Madame Su's side. There seemed to be an unknown tacit understanding between the two. In the end, what kind of tacit understanding? It really made people somewhat puzzled. Mr. Mo, do not hesitate to speak. On that day, who was the lady that issued this task? Su Jingyu saw that Mr. Mo appeared somewhat hesitant. Suddenly, Su Jingyu's expression became apprehensive, and standing for upright justice and righteousness, he spoke. Mr. Imo looked at Su Jingyu, and then glanced at Su Zian. Unexpectedly, his eyes meet with Su Luo's. Momentarily, it seemed as if he had received a fright, and his eyes unconsciously avoided hers. It is. Mr. Imo since the beginning had his head lowered, not daring to lift his eyes, and his voice was also intermittent. You should feel assured, you will have this general to give you justice for everything. This matter will also not be spread out. With regards to your job at the mercenary union, it will also absolutely not create any complications for you. Su Zian guaranteed. He was the great general, having had the position for a long time. His body had a kind of calm, self-assured, domineering aura. Clap, clap, clap. The sounds of applause suddenly came from the doorway of the main hall. That sound was intermittent, as if it was rather interested. Su Zian's sharp eyebrows rose and roared toward the outside. Who's outside? His next sentence was roared at the guards protecting the doorway. What's the matter? Hadn't I instructed not to allow anyone inside? This matter, no matter what, could be said to be the Su Manners family scandal. Su Zian would absolutely not allow this matter to spread outside. However, now an outsider had actually come in. Yet, in the wake of the sound of the arriving footsteps, Su Zian's expression changed slightly. A group of people escorted that godlike man, who slowly set foot inside the main hall. He was accustomed to standing in the front, with a pair of purple eyes that was incomparably apathetic. One could only see his body, which appeared graceful and honorable. The Crown Prince. It turned out to be the Crown Prince. Why did he come here at this time? Furthermore, following behind him were two females in the prime of their youth. Su Zian recognized them. One of them was Su Shi, and the other one was Qing'er. You came out. Su Zian hadn't had a chance to speak, when Madame Su already excitedly stood up. Her body appeared to tremble slightly, the reason being that she was too happy. The Qing'er from Madame Su's mouth was Su Qing. She was Su family's second miss, Su Shi's fully blood-related older sister. Because she had exceptionally good talent, from a very young age, she had been accepted by Grandmaster Lan Hai as his personal disciple. She was instructed with great care while following alongside her teacher. Half a year ago, she arrived at the third rank's bottleneck phase, and heeding Grandmaster Lan Hai's instructions, then went into seclusion to cultivate. Now that she had come out, could it be? Madame Su and Su Zian both stared at Su Qing, full of expectations. At this point in time, they had completely forgotten Su Luo's matter. Compared to the always proud Su Qing, why would Su Luo even matter? Father, mother. Su Qing stepped forward to pay her respects to her parents. Chapter 180. 100 mouths can't be refuted for. Qing'er you. Su Zian and Madame Su both bit their lips. They nervously and expectantly looked at Su Qing, awaiting news about what they were hoping for, from her mouth. Su Qing lightly smiled and nodded her head slightly. Qing'er was lucky and did not dishonor her name. This time's seclusion into closed-door cultivation helped me advance to the 4th rank. Her words were clear and nonchalant. However, it possessed a kind of arrogance of looking down on people that was proud and aloof. Indeed, being able to advance to the 4th rank at her age, her prospects were simply beyond measure. It was important to note that apart from His Highness Prince Jin, whose formidable and abnormal innate gift allowed him to advance to the 7th rank before 20 years old, even surveying the entire Eastern Ling Empire, people who were capable of advancing to the 4th rank at her age could be counted on one hand. Only a very few people could be counted. Having heard what was said, Su Zian was immediately surprised but ecstatic. Good. Simply great. I, Su Zian, having really amassed a lot of fortune and virtuous deeds for most of my life. Only then the wonderful daughter that I was longing for had come. Ha 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 ha. Su Zian was so happy that he laughed heartily. He had an expression of being extremely proud of himself. Madame Su was even happier. She held onto Su Qing's hand and smiled unceasingly. She nodded her head and repeatedly praised her daughter. Out of the corner of Su Qing's eyes, she glanced at Su Shi, who was at her side. Seeing her lovable and charming little face with her red lips starting to pout, Su Qing's gaze casted towards Su Zian, and smilingly said, "Congratulations to father and mother for two simultaneous happy events in the family. Oh, besides your news, there is an additional happy occasion?" Su Zian said with a gentle voice. Right now, he simply dearly loved Su Qing to the bones. Daddy still doesn't know, right? This time Shier's luck is even better. She had a fortuitous meeting on the road. Now she is already at the 3rd rank. Su Qing smilingly said, "3rd rank. Shier, is this true?" Regarding this matter, the happiest was none other than Madame Su. Each and every one of her children had become a person worthy of respect, allowing her to be very satisfied. Seeing everyone's eyes concentrated on her own body, Su Xi's originally prideful expression suddenly became somewhat shy. She put on the appearance of a lady, lowered her head and nodded. "Good. Very good. Simply great. Indeed, the heavens have really assisted my Su family." Su Zian was unable to suppress being proud of himself, and started to laugh heartily. "Really worthy of being my Su Zian's daughter. Really capable of earning face for your father." He slanted his head towards Madame Su with a yielding and laughing voice and said, "Madam Wife, you gave birth to good daughters. Each and every one of them is worthy of respect. This general is overjoyed. Unlike those two concubines' daughters, one compared to the other, is even more useless and good for nothing, annoying and bothersome. Haha, the ancients truly did not deceive me. The fruits from the first wife compared to the concubines are indeed as different as the sky and earth." Su Zian now completely lacked any misgivings about Su Luo's mood. In front of everyone, he hardly tried to mask his show of love and bias towards the other two daughters. A thread of previously absent mocking expression flashed through Su Luo's eyes. A 3rd-ranked Su Xi? A 4th-ranked Su Qing? It really was indeed formidable. Their cultivation practice spread was really fast. She was really about to die from envy. Compared to them, she really was a second-rate little loser. In the family, the one with her head was at the lowest position. However, if Su Zian knew that Su Luo had merely used a month's time to advance from nothing to the 2nd rank, it would very likely scare him to death. Because even Su Xi, the little genius that he had always labeled as gifted, had started her cultivation practice at 5 years old. She had cultivated for the entire 8 years, and merely reached the pinnacle of the 2nd rank. If it was not for a coincidental opportunity this time, who knew when she would break through to the 3rd rank? However, Su Luo had reached the 2nd rank only using the short period of a month, exactly 30 days. This kind of cultivation speed, not merely surveying the Eastern Ling Empire, even surveying the entire continent, one would not find another's cultivation speed that could compare to hers. Chapter 181. 100 Mouths Can't Be Refuted 5. It was a pity that besides Su Luo herself, nobody else knew about her dramatic rise in cultivation speed. Her cheap father was even more in the dark. However, Su Zian's remark contrarily linked back to Su Luo, and so the Crown Prince once again redirected the topic to the main discussion. One could see him lightly smile. "The great General Su, your residence appears to be very lively?" With the Crown Prince present, Su Zian didn't want to continue hearing the case. "Because you don't wash your dirty linen in public." If the Crown Prince were to find out the stuff that occurred to Su Wan's body, then it may implicate his and Su Xi's affair. After all, even though they were interested in each other, but there still wasn't a real imperial decree to confirm the marriage. Su Zian could only be seen dry coughing twice to cover up his awkwardness, and gave a hollow laugh, saying, "Allowing His Highness the Crown Prince to see something ridiculous. Actually, it really isn't a big deal. It's merely the noise from the fighting among daughters in the family, seeing it is to laugh at it." Su Zian's hints were already quite clear. He didn't want this matter to continue, at least not when the Crown Prince was present. He wanted to end it here early. However, the Crown Prince appeared to not have heard his hints. He could only be seen sitting upright at a high position, and raised an eyebrow at Su Luo while smiling not quite a smile. "Oh, it's the residence's 4th miss again? Looks like the great General Su's education of a daughter still has some lapses." Yes, allowing His Highness the Crown Prince to see such a laughable thing." Su Zian rushed to take over the subject of the conversation. Right now he just wanted to change the subject. Who would have thought that the crown prince was a step ahead to speak? Just now this highness at the door heard Mr. Mo appear to testify against someone? This highness couldn't have misheard, right? It was obvious that His Highness the Crown Prince had grabbed onto this matter and wasn't going to let go. Su Zian had miscalculated. He never expected that the Crown Prince would be so narrow-minded. It was because of one sentence by Su Luo at that time. The Crown Prince couldn't lift it up. Consequently, His Highness the Crown Prince's anger had thoroughly landed on Su Luo. Normally not seeing her daily, he could forget it. Now he just happened to run into her, not taking advantage to hit her while she was down. Then it wouldn't be His Highness the Crown Prince. Su Zian's forehead was covered in a drizzling layer of cold sweat. His gloomy face hinted towards Mr. Mo. He hoped that Mr. Mo could evade the issue. Then everything would be well. But what kind of person was Mr. Mo? He was an opportunist best adept at weighing people's words and observing their facial expressions. The great General Su's government position originally could scare him. But now, compared to His Highness the Crown Prince, the great General Su's rank was lower. Moreover, unaware of what thoughts stemmed from Madame Su, unexpectedly, she also didn't block Mr. Mo's idea. Hence, Mr. Mo pretended to not have received hints from the great General Su, bowed to His Highness the Crown Prince and said, "Reporting to His Highness the Crown Prince, the person this lowly person is testifying against is the person just now spoken of, the fourth Miss Su Luo." It was really her. The Crown Prince's pair of elegant eyelids lifted up. His solemn and cold eyes were filled with a murderous aura. He was only seen leisurely saying, "Oh, you will testify against this fourth miss? What are you testifying about?" Su Zian's heart was so depressed. He knew that now, no matter what he did, he couldn't conceal it. Since he couldn't conceal it, then it was also fine. He could take advantage of this chance to tidy up the family. In any case, he didn't lack daughters. He didn't lack naturally gifted daughters that brought him pride. Therefore, Su Zian's expression was merely indifferent, maintaining his silence. Mr. Mo saw everyone's gaze focus upon his body. He lifted his eyes, which were clear and determined. He firmly stated, "Your Highness the Crown Prince is unaware. Previously, a person came to the Mercenary Union issuing a task to tarnish the third Miss Su. And also the person who issued the task is the fourth Miss Su." Gasp! Mr. Mo had just finished speaking. One could only hear the sound of simultaneous breaths being released from all around. Chapter 182. 100 Mouths Can't Be Refuted. 6. The Su family's fourth miss had actually gone to the Mercenary Union to issue a task. The task was to tarnish the Su family's third miss? If this were to spread out. Wanner, a few days ago already. Madame Su, appearing to be frightened, resulting in the suspense building, thereby adding more fuel to the fire. What? Third older sister had already been. She was absolutely shocked. Even though the last time, Su Wan caused her to fall into the water, however, her careful apologies for a long time had already compensated her loss. The ill feelings between her and Su Wan had already been eliminated. Now, Su Shi's heart only thought of all of Su Wan's good sides. How could she even consider her bad sides? One could only see her rushing in a rage towards Su Luo, pointing at Su Luo furiously and yelling out, "Speak! Is this really true? You really went as far as to issue a task asking people to tarnish third older sister. Too malicious. Really too malicious." Under numerous denouncements, ridicules, derisions and despising looks that gathered together, Su Luo's face could unexpectedly maintain an unwavering smile. People couldn't help but admit that her mental abilities were really formidable. The corner of Su Luo's mouth rose slightly into an arc, slowly shaking her head. If you want to condemn someone, you don't have to worry about the pretext. You still won't admit it? The Mercenary Union's administrator of this matter could actually wrongly accuse you? Su Jingyu had a resentful look, and a manner of things having failed to meet his expectations. He pointed to Su Luo and lamented bitterly, "Su Luo, ah Su Luo, when did you become this vicious and merciless? How could you do this? No matter what is said, Wanner is still your older sister." Su Qing did not say a word, however. The corner of her eyes were lifted very high, and could not conceal what was shown. She despised and disdained this younger sister born from a concubine. She was merely the concubine's daughter that she barely looked at. Merely an aunt that she could step on as she wished. She couldn't draw an iota of interest from this ice beauty Su Qing. Originally, it was not something I did, so how could I admit to it? Su Luo spread out her hands and very helplessly shrugged her shoulders. What she said was not false. The person who issued the task was Su Wan Ah. As for whatever reasons that finally led the retribution to land on Su Wan's body. As for this, it could only be said that the heavens above had eyes. Good, good. Death is near at hand, and you still won't admit to it. There was evidence given against you, and you still dare to not admit. Su Jingyu was so angry that almost his entire body was trembling. The finger he had pointed at Su Luo continued to tremble nonstop. His anger seemed to have reached the peak, and turned his head towards Mr. Mo. Mr. Mo, whenever tasks are issued at the Mercenary Union, there should be a record, right? Mr. Mo sighed, nodded his head and silently took out a book from his chest area. He lifted up both hands to hand it over to His Highness the Crown Prince. His Highness the Crown Prince took it under Mr. Mo's prompt. His slender and sculpted finger unhurriedly flipped to the designated page. Unexpectedly, it really is here. However, this handwriting seems to be quite elegant and spirited. As expected, the personality compared to the writing is very different. The Crown Prince tossed the book to Su Jingyu, staring at Su Luo with a smile. His eyes radiated an evil laugh that could devour a person. The expression that he looked at Su Luo was similar to looking at a prisoner locked in the cell, on the eve of her execution, with nowhere to escape to. Not needing to do the job himself, in order to deal with this loathsome girl, to give vent to his anger, was also pretty good. After everybody had seen and passed it around, finally, the book ended up in Su Xian's hand. In a rage he tossed the book at Su Luo. Human testimony and material evidence are all here. What more do you have to say? The human testimony was naturally from Mr. Mo. The material evidence. Su Luo had a smile that was not quite a smile and loudly read. The person who signed Su Luo. All of a sudden, she burst into loud laughter. She was laughing so hard that she held her stomach, as if she was unable to breathe. Chapter 183. 100 mouths can't be refuted. 7. Everyone in the room speechlessly looked at Su Luo. Su Xian's eyebrows knitted together, and he thundered, "What are you laughing at?" Su Xian's heart secretly thought, perhaps this loathsome girl knew her capital offense was impossible to escape from. Thus she was scared senseless? Su Luo, with great difficulty, finally stopped laughing. She waved the book, her eyes sweeping everyone present one by one, and finally, her black as ink eyes met Su Xian's. Her eyes had an obvious mocking expression. "Honorable father, since you've seen it, whose name is it that is signed on this?" Su Luo raised her eyebrow. Her voice unhurriedly asked. It was as if, in the room, the martial artist deliberately exuding a strong overbearing pressure, did not faze her at all. "You can't even recognize your own name?" Su Xian frowned. "Su Luo, I'm warning you, it's useless to play the fool. You had best stop while you can." Su Luo laughed and shaking her head, slowly said, "Yes, the 2 words on this paper are Su Luo. However, the biggest flaw also lies in these 2 words." Flaw? There was actually a flaw. Mr. Mo and Madame Su both frowned slightly at that moment. In their opinion, the evidence prepared had been completely foolproof. How could there be a flaw? What flaw? Su Xian's eyebrows knitted together. "It's very simple reasoning. Let's say it this way, honorable father. If you were to go to the Mercenary Union and issue a task to assassinate somebody, would you sign the 3 characters of Su Xian?" Su Luo raised her eyebrow and smiled faintly at them. This was an error in thinking. The opponent wanted to frame her, therefore had deliberately wrote her name, treating it as proof that she was the criminal. However, they forgot about a normal human heart's logic. When doing bad things, who would dare to openly write their real name? Let alone when ordering such a nasty task as tarnishing the 3rd Miss Su's innocence? Su Xian was suddenly stumped by the question. In fact, what Su Luo had said was completely right. If you were to go and do bad things, Who would dare to openly write their own name? Who wouldn't go and do it secretly? Asking himself honestly, if he were to go and issue this type of task, even if he were to die, he would not write down his real name. That being said, Su Luo was actually innocent? Could it be that somebody was trying to frame her? At this moment, Su Xian's expression became unsettled, suddenly dark or suddenly light, making it impossible to know what he was really thinking. How could the crown prince let Su Luo escape this calamity so easily? One could only see the corner of his mouth lift as he spoke coldly. Maybe it was because you have nothing to fear. Therefore you openly wrote your own name? Su Luo almost rolled her eyes. Was her IQ that low? Who was dumb enough to do that? Her habit of doing things was to have every step calculated. If she hadn't planned out everything afterwards, then she wouldn't take any action. She wasn't like that stupid Su Wan, with so many flaws that the plan collapsed. However, Su Luo did not expect that a few words could clear her reputation so easily. Those words were capable of swaying Su Xian's heart, and had already achieved the desired effect. Also, Su Luo's ancient well-like eyes did not even ripple, as she unhurriedly looked around. Finally, her eyes fixed on Mr. Mo, and she coldly and clearly asked, Mr. Mo, let me ask, that day at the mercenary union, was it really me? Did you personally see me? Mr. Mo did not expect that Su Luo's ordinary, serene eyes would be so overbearing. Under a gaze of such aggressive strength, he had an irrepressible feeling of guilt. How could it be like this? Didn't Nanny Zhao say that Su Manor's fourth girl was a good-for-nothing, and was very easy to deal with? Chapter 184. Confrontation at the Scene, 1. Mr. Mo took a deep breath and pressed down the indescribable fear that arose. He lifted his eyebrows and his deep gaze landed upon Su Luo's body, then lightly said, The fourth Miss Su, you must not continue to object, it's useless. Then you admit that you personally saw me? Su Luo shallowly smiled, unblinkingly staring at him. The fourth Miss Su, why should you once again court disgrace? That day, if I didn't personally see you, then how would this lowly person dare to testify against you? Mr. Mo's expression was bitter and grieved. Su Luo suddenly smiled. Her smile was like the queen of the night that bloomed, so beautifully alluring that it could not be reproduced. Then the me that day you spoke about, was I wearing a cloak or just as I am now? Su Luo smiled faintly and asked him. She didn't do it. Therefore she was not afraid to confront him. The more thoroughly she probed, then the more flaws the opponent would reveal. Because made-up evidence, after all, was not really true, and simply couldn't bear any scrutiny. This was also one of the reasons why, under thousands of eyes, she was secure in her knowledge since the beginning. Was she wearing a cloak or as she was now? Mr. Mo hesitated. This detail had never been talked about before. Mr. Mo's gaze secretly looked towards Nanny Zhao. Nanny Zhao stood behind Madame Su. Her expression remained calm, however, almost imperceptibly. She nodded her head slightly. After Mr. Mo obtained her prompt, he once again put on a proper and righteous expression. That day, the fourth Miss Su didn't have any cover on. She came as she is now. She merely requested that this lowly person not spread this matter. Good. Let's just pretend that I, Su Luo, is as stupid as a pig, and doesn't know to mask her appearance when doing bad things. Also, am careless enough to sign my real name. In that case, I now ask you, on that day when you saw me, was I wearing a jasmine or Chinese peony fragrance? Su Luo faintly smiled. Only her pair of profoundly clear eyes, which could distinguish between right and wrong, watched Mr. Mo. Those eyes were like an ancient well, without a ripple on the surface. However, their vigor could intimidate a person. A person dared not look straight at it. Jasmine fragrance or Chinese peony fragrance. This Mr. Mo really did remember. The lady that came on that day seemed to have the jasmine fragrance on her body. That smell did not scatter for a long time. Therefore his impression compared to others was rather deep. However, how should he answer it now? The Chinese peony? Mr. Mo lifted his eyes, and looked at Su Luo's mocking and ridiculing eyes. All of a sudden he couldn't respond. Even though he was a worldly person who administered things at the mercenary union, he didn't know why. In front of Su Luo, His heart unconsciously seemed to emit a kind of unprecedented panic and dread. Obviously, this girl was merely a good-for-nothing. But why was it that every single one of her sentences was hard for him to answer, almost forcing him to spill the beans? Mr. Mo wiped at the cold sweat on his forehead, unsure how to respond. At this time, Su Shi angrily glowered at Su Luo and inserted a sentence. The fourth older sister is really laughable. Just relying on you. How could you even afford to buy rouge powder? Or even wear some fragrance? Really laughable. These words coincidentally reminded Mr. Mo. The corner of his mouth evoked a stiff smile. This question by the fourth Miss Su, it's hard for this lowly person to answer. Because after so many days, this lowly person cannot clearly remember whether the fourth Miss was wearing a fragrance. Mr. Mo's reaction was pretty fast. He didn't fall into his own first trap. However, he could escape the first question. Let's see how he would escape the second question. Su Luo indifferently shot a quick glance at Su Shi, and once again cast her eyes upon Mr. Mo's old face, which was now overflowing with cold sweat. What the fifth younger sister said is right. As a concubine's daughter that couldn't even afford to buy fragrant powder, how could I have the gold coins to issue a task at the mercenary union? Oh, that's right, Mr. Mo. How many gold coins were spent on that task? Su Luo's expression was unperturbed and lacked a single ripple. The corner of her mouth slightly lifted up. Chapter 185. Confrontation at the Scene 2. From beginning to end, she had an expression of watching a play with a touch of mockery, as she watched the people around her. Now the surrounding people's expressions were also not very good. They also followed the logic, and came to a sudden realization. Indeed, seeing the old-fashioned clothing on Su Luo's body, and that natural face without any cosmetics. Above, her head appeared to have never worn any jewelry. Looking at her, one could only see a clean face and an impoverished appearance. How could she have enough gold coins to issue a task at the mercenary union? This was impossible, right? Even His Highness the Crown Prince started to frown, even though he had experienced this loathsome girl's clear eloquence the previous time. However, he never expected that she could be clever and collected to such a degree. At present, everyone at the scene was stronger than her. Regardless of which person was pulled out, that person could easily sweat her to death with the palm of a hand. Under this kind of ambience, a situation where almost everyone was hostile to her, she could still speak frankly with assurance. She advanced gradually step by step while setting up traps everywhere. Calmly and unperturbed, she washed away the injustice against herself. This kind of Su Luo was really the rumored good-for-nothing? If this kind of her was a good-for-nothing, then what should this entire group of people that was forced to retreat step by step, and was powerless to resist her, be called? His Highness the Crown Prince's sharp eyebrows lifted slightly. A contemplating expression flashed across his eyes. Frankly speaking, he was a little interested in this kind of Su Luo. Just at this moment, the distinct sounds of footsteps could suddenly be heard coming from outside. From the doorway, a red-robed, peerless youngster leisurely walked in. Such a beautiful and handsome young man. Su Luo sucked in some cold air. He was dressed in a red brocade robe. His exquisite face was flawless without a trace of blemish. He had a pair of pitch-black, beautifully clear eyes. Above his nose and between his eyebrows was an exotic beauty mark, making him appear even more mysterious and pretty handsome. What was even more unusual was that his body gave off a temperament as pure as a child. He had been smiling since the beginning. Since the time he came in, the corner of his mouth was lifted into a radiant arc that hadn't gone down. When the Crown Prince saw this person, his eyebrows wrinkled. A dark color flashed across his eyes as if restraining himself. It seemed he was rather afraid of this person. When Su Zian saw this youngster, his complexion darkened momentarily, but quickly restored to its original state. Afterwards, he put a smile on his face and went up to welcome this person. Truly, the biggest change in expression belonged to Mr. Mo, who was overflowing with cold sweat. He looked at the red-robed youngster at the door, and his foot slipped. Both of his legs seemed to have gone limp from lack of strength, and he directly sank to his knees. Didn't know that President Bachin would honor us with his presence. Please excuse me for not going out to greet you, and hope you will forgive me. Su Zian, wearing a smile, cordially cupped his hands in greeting. Beichening came from the mysterious Bachin clan. Right now, he was the president of the mercenary union in the Eastern Ling Empire. He always had a smiling appearance. Of course, the fiercer he was when killing people, the more gorgeous his smile became. The only people who were aware of this habit of his was not his closest brothers, but the countless corpses that had died with their eyes wide open. Beichening had both hands behind his back and calmly stood within the main hall. After looking around once, he faintly smiled while casting a glance at Su Zian and nodded his head slightly. General Su, no need to be so polite, haha. Your luck is really pretty good. You gave birth to a great daughter. In the future, you will achieve meteoric success. Your future prospects are beyond measure. Congratulations. Once he finished speaking, Beichening very optimistically clapped Su Zian's shoulder. This was the posture of a superior to a subordinate. In the empire, the president of the mercenary union and the great general that protected the country was of the same rank. There wasn't one was of a higher or lower rank, so to speak. However, due to Beichening's family background, his status was a lot higher. Even though Su Zian's heart was unsatisfied, he still would not dare to resist. Because the Beichin family was really mysterious, was extremely high in status, too high to reach. This last name, once it appeared, was in existence that made people despair. Chapter 186, Confrontation at the Scene 3. Su Zian thought that Beichening was referring to the crown prince and Su Shi's matter. A smile appeared on his solemn and cold face. Indeed, I'm indebted to His Highness the Crown Prince's undeserving kindness. This really is Shier's fortune. Who knew that Beichening would frown? He was used to speaking directly and annoyedly said, "What does this have to do with the crown prince?" Huh? Su Zian stared blankly at him. Before, he had said he would achieve meteoric success. Could it be that he was not referring to the crown prince and Su Shi's matter? Then, what could it be? Beichening placatingly clapped Su Zian's shoulder. The number one person in the capital. Did you forget who it is? Jean, His Highness Prince Jean? Su Zian subconsciously blurted it out. His speech even began to stammer. But after speaking this sentence, he immediately felt that something was not quite right. Because in this great hall, the person seated at the highest position was His Highness the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince had always been secretly competing with His Highness Prince Jean. Although everyone knew that every quality he had couldn't be compared to His Highness Prince Jean, nobody dared to say this to his face. For a moment, Su Zian saw His Highness Crown Prince's complexion turn dark in an instant. His regret made his intestines turn green. Madame Su saw that the atmosphere was amiss, and she hurriedly stepped out to resolve the embarrassment. She smiled in a sweet-tempered manner and softly spoke. The venerable Beichening really likes to crack jokes. His Highness Prince Jean and our Su Manor never had any dealings. Don't know which family's good news you are congratulating about? His Highness Prince Jean was placed on a pedestal. He was like an exiled immortal from the 9 layers of heaven. Ordinary people could only profane him. Su Manor always had a clear view of things, and knew it was hard to become His Highness Prince Jin's follower. Therefore in this world, they could only follow in His Highness the Crown Prince's footsteps. With just this one sentence by Madame Su, she clearly stated that there was no relationship between Su Manor and His Highness Prince Jean. Also because of this, His Highness the Crown Prince's complexion, which was as black as the bottom of a pot, gradually started to recover. Even though it was still stiff, but it was not as ruthless as before. However, it seemed as if Beichening had enmity towards His Highness the Crown Prince. From the time he entered until now, he didn't even bother to say hello to the Crown Prince. He completely took the Empire's Crown Prince as invisible. Considering Beichening's mysterious and terrifying family background, His Highness the Crown Prince could only suffer this humiliation and swallow it. Beichening faintly smiled and cast a quick glance at the Crown Prince. He turned his head towards Su Zian and smiled. The great General Su, Madame Su, your news is really lacking. Could it be that you don't know His Highness Prince Jean? Towards a miss in your family? His gaze swept around, seeing everyone's interest and attention was hooked by him. It seemed as if Bei Chening had let something slip, and giving a few hey dry laughing sounds. Chuckle, 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 cannot say, cannot say. The mysteries of the heavens must not be revealed. Even though he stopped the conversation in time, however, the first half of the sentence was obviously enough of a hint. His Highness Prince Jean towards a miss in your family. In addition to Bei Chenying's congratulating left and right. What did this signify? Surely even an idiot hearing it could understand. Could it really be true? Su Zian and Madame Su's heart momentarily rose to their throat. If His Highness Prince Jean really fell in love with their daughter, how great a fortune was that? Capable of enticing His Highness Prince Jean. For Su Manor it was simply like reaching heaven in a single bound. Suddenly Su Zian became excited. Madame Su also became excited. Consequently, both of their eyes simultaneously landed on Su Qing standing at the side. The second miss from the Su family was born from the first wife. Her status was honorable, and she was absolutely beautiful to look at. Even more hard to come by was that she was amazingly gifted. Her cultivation speed in the entire Eastern Ling Empire's younger generation was among the top 5. What was more, Su Qing was a disciple of Grandmaster Lan Hai. Chapter 187, Confrontation at the Scene 4. In the capacity of protecting the Empire's laws, Grandmaster Lan Hai enjoyed great rights to speak in front of His Majesty the Emperor. His Majesty would look for Grandmaster Lan Hai to consult on many things. This hard-to-come-by opportunity could be from Grandmaster Lan Hai playing the matchmaker from within. Based on the above-mentioned statements, if His Highness Prince Jean really fancied a Su family miss, then it could be none other than Su Qing. As a result, Su Zian and Madame Su's pair of eyes concentrated on Su Qing's face. Their expression was complex. There was hope, with expectation and longing mixed in, simply not even trying to conceal it. With Su Zian and Madame Su leading, everyone followed their gaze to look at Su Qing. Was it her? It should be her, right? If it was real, then from among the Su family's few misses, the one worthy was none other than the second Miss Su. Heavens, this was none other than His Highness Prince Jean. Now Su Qing, under the many pairs of radiant and glittering watchful gazes, her normally cold, proud and aloof pair of eyes dropped down slightly. On her white as jade complexion appeared a distinctly visible scarlet blush. She could feel that both of her own cheeks were boiling hot, but her eyelids could not conceal her happy expression. His Highness Prince Jean, recalling that perfect immortal-like male, hearing that he had fallen in love with her, Su Qing felt as though she was about to suffocate. She was so nervous that she forgot how she should arrange her hands and feet. Why are all of you looking at me this way? Su Qing originally thought to utter an angry rebuke, but her voice unexpectedly carried a touch of happiness that she was unable to conceal. Qing, are you? You and His Highness Prince Jean. Su Zian rubbed his hands. He nervously and expectantly asked. All of you are too hateful. I'm going to ignore all of you. Su Qing shyly lifted her skirt and rapidly ran out. She never thought a glimpse of her graceful figure at Fei Du Bridge would make His Highness Prince Jean continue to think about her and never forget. On the first day she came back, he would send someone in his place to announce this. This was simply too shameful. While Su Qing was running, her heart was as sweet as honey. The corner of her mouth perked up. No matter what, she couldn't turn the arc down. With Su Qing running out, this only confirmed her and His Highness Prince Jin's not-so-innocent relationship. However, Su Zian and Madame Su looked favorably on this. They also could not conceal the smiling expression from the corner of their eyes. Only His Highness the Crown Prince's complexion darkened again in such a short time. His solemn and cold gaze swept towards Su Zian. Su Zian's complexion immediately became stiff, and he forcefully masked the joy on his face. Certainly, the people with a change in their complexion at the scene were not only these individuals. Among them, the main focus that needed to be mentioned was the venerable president of the Mercenary Union. He dumbfoundedly watched Su Qing shyly lifting her skirt to flee, and with the same blank expression, watched Su Zian and Madame Su's repeatedly cheerful expression. His forehead wrinkled, and an annoyed expression appeared on his face. It seemed like he with a good heart had done a bad deed. What should be done? What was Su Qing doing? This didn't have anything to do with her. Why would she shyly run away? It was very easy for people to misunderstand, okay? Now with her running away, it would only confirm that between her and Nangong Luoyan, there was an ambiguous relationship? Then Bai Qining apprehensively, nervously, quietly and furtively shot a glance at Su Luo. He was guilty, and really didn't have the courage to look at her expression. However, how could it be? Bai Qining now discovered that Su Luo appeared to not be affected at all by this matter. She stood there indifferently, with an expression that was light like the wind. The corner of her mouth formed a shallow smile. Her pitch-black, ancient well-like eyes were rippleless. Their depth was undetectable. Seeing this with his quick glance, Bai Qining was even more remorseful. He really had a cheap mouth. This time, he would never be able to explain this clearly. Chapter 188, Confrontation at the Scene 5. Based on his many years of rolling around among crowds of women, his experience told him that Su Luo was the unperturbed type of miss. The more her heart cared, the calmer her expression. This was the same as him. When he killed people, the more excited he was, the more brilliant the smile that would appear. Seeing Su Luo unruffled and maintaining a cool-headed complexion, Bai Qining tried to console his little heart while grieving for the 1000th time. Finished. She was definitely mad. She would definitely let her anger loose on Nangong Luoyan's body. Nangong Luoyan would transfer any suffering onto his own body. Now Bai Qining became so depressed that he wanted to run into a wall. Su Luo inadvertently saw this venerable Bai Qinin's suddenly bright then gloomy expression, changing like a mix of colors. Inevitably, she became somewhat baffled. Bai Qining discovered that Su Luo was staring fixedly at himself. He secretly winked at her. His eyes seemed to say, "Sister-in-law, a misunderstanding. It was purely a misunderstanding. In Nangong Luoyan's heart, apart from you, there is no one else. You must by all means not misunderstand this." However, not everyone could form a mutual understanding with him. Su Luo saw both of his eyes full of watery light, winking at her non-stop. In her heart, she secretly muttered, could this venerable Bai Qining have an eye twitch problem? Or perhaps his brain was convulsing. Seeing Su Luo caught up in contemplation, Bai Qining thought that she understood his meaning. He thought she was pondering if she should forgive Nangong Luoyan about this matter. Consequently, he once again winked towards Su Luo. His eyes were saying, "Sister-in-law, it was all this little cheap mouth's fault. You mustn't provoke Nangong Luoyan. If you provoke him, then he would oppress us." Su Luo saw venerable Bai Qinin's pair of eyes once again wink at her. No matter what, it wouldn't stop. Inevitably, her face was full of sympathy. Such a beautiful face. Why was it ruined by those pair of eyes? It was really a shame. If Bai Qining was capable of hearing Su Luo's mind, in all likelihood, he would have spit out blood from anger. As a result, so to speak, casting amorous glances, and whatnot when running into an unreliable person. It really could make a person vomit blood. In fact, today's General Assembly to interrogate Su Luo was really unsuccessful. It was first interrupted by His Highness the Crown Prince. Subsequently, Bai Qining also inserted in another thick poll. An originally proper interrogation was halted again and again, deliberately complicating the issue. However, Bai Qining didn't come today, because he had nothing to do, and was out for a stroll. He was here under someone's order to help Su Luo. He was going to give biased help. He did not wait for Su Zian to invite him to sit. He just coolly and collectedly sat down. He happily and contentedly sat on Su Zian's seat. His movement was so smooth and confident. It was as if that seat originally belonged to him. This Bai Qining, relying upon being from the Bai Qining family, his arrogance was greater than even the crown prince's. One only saw him reclining upon the red sandalwood chair, both legs sticking up, carelessly waving his hand, and with all smiles, changed the conversation back to the initial topic. "General Su, let's stop gossiping. Weren't you investigating a case just now? Please continue." It just so happens that this lord could also listen in. Su Xian's heart was very angry, but he dared not let it show on his face. He inwardly endured this and his face only displayed a smiling expression. This matter, let's just end it here. How can this be okay? This won't do, it must be investigated. Moreover, it must be investigated thoroughly. Bei Qining did not agree. He came burdened with the boss's order. If he returned without any achievement, then where could he place his own face? Su Xian thought about it, and his heart inevitably became somewhat upset. This matter, so many people inside the main hall now knew. Even if he wanted to cover it up, he couldn't keep it in the dark. Now with regards to this matter, he could only fasten all the criminal charges on Su Luo's head. Finally, he would step out and act righteously to punish her if justice demanded it. Perhaps then, he could still redeem some of his face back. Chapter 189. Confrontation at the Scene 6. Thinking of this, Su Xian restrained himself, glared at Su Luo and sternly said, "Even as the matter stands now, you still dare to argue. Come, drag her out of here." The corner of Su Luo's mouth lifted into an almost non-existent sneer. She could clearly see that Su Xian had flown into a rage out of humiliation. He wanted to use her as a sacrificial lamb to settle this matter. So much, so that he wouldn't even give her a final chance to defend herself. This kind of father was simply too vile. This type of official residence, even smelling the air made her nauseous. If it weren't for her need to secretly investigate her background in Su Manor, she would have already waved her sleeves and left this wolf's lair earlier. However, before Su Luo could speak, Bei Qinying's brows knotted. He waved his hand. "Wait a moment. You could have made a move against anyone else. But to touch the person at the bottom of Nangong's heart, you must not want to live, right?" Bei Qining turned his head to Su Xian, and frowning said, "The great General Su, this is where you are wrong. Just now, the fourth Miss Su plainly said that she doesn't have any gold. Then how could she go to the mercenary union to issue a task? Pertaining to this point, you still haven't clarified it yet. Then how could you directly just add these charges onto her body? This seems rather too arbitrary. Don't tell me General Su normally investigates cases in the military in this way?" It was okay when Bei Qining didn't speak, but once he spoke, he stupefied Su Xian. Now, even though he had a faint smiling expression on his face, but everyone could see that this venerable president of the mercenary union was unhappy. The accusation Bei Qining slammed down was really too big. If it stuck, then the accusation could cost him his noble title and official job. How could Su Xian dare to take on this charge? He could only wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead, and hurriedly stretched his smile even wider. Forcing a laugh, he responded, "The venerable Bei Qian is joking. This is merely a small matter within my own family, therefore." Yet it seemed as if Bei Qining wanted to argue strongly with him. One could only see him coldly raise his eyebrow. Such a minor family matter, and you can't even try the case clearly. Then what qualification do you have to be in charge of the Empire's military forces? General Su, wouldn't you say I'm right? A thread of rage flashed through Su Xian's eyes. Everyone should be at the same ranking position. If it weren't for me giving the Bei Qian family some face, then your daddy would have already not paid any fucking attention to you. Now you have actually dared to come and lecture such a venerable man like me. However, these were merely Su Xian's mental thoughts. His appearance only had a smile that was more good-natured than anyone else's. He continuously nodded his head. Yes, what the venerable Bei Qian said is right. With that said, Bei Qining then let him go. He turned his head around and smiled at Su Luo, as if currying for a favor from her, and said, "The fourth Miss Su, now you can defend yourself to right the wrongs. You should rest assured. You only need to say it and nobody inside this hall would dare to bully you." Without waiting for Su Luo to respond, His Highness the Crown Prince displayed his displeasure first. He coldly smiled, letting out a few hum sounds. Venerable Bei Qian should not be so partial. Bei Qining had a self-satisfied smile and waved his hand uncaringly. "Be at ease. This official never uses public office to avenge private wrongs. I also never rely on my strength to mistreat the weak, and I never bully frail women. Presumably, His Highness the Crown Prince would also not do such senseless things, right? These three separate nevers were very clearly the sentences Su Luo had used to set up the Crown Prince that day, when he came to Su Manor to break off the engagement. These three never sentences didn't matter much, but that final sentence left unsaid, that not raise up phrase was the true meaning of Bai Qinying's words. Humph! His Highness the Crown Prince was jabbed right at the center of his matter with Su Luo. He resentfully glared at Su Luo, then coldly snorted and turned his face away. It was all this loathsome girl's fault, causing him to become the laughingstock of his opponent. He absolutely would not let her off so easily. He had never gotten along with Prince Jin, whereas Bai Qining was Prince Jin's #1 henchman. Both of them had already strived against each other for a long time, merely bickering over differing opinions. How could the conceited status of the Crown Prince be the thick-skinned Bai Qinying's opponent? Consequently, every time they crossed swords, the Crown Prince could only glare at him. Chapter 190, Confrontation at the Scene 7. Su Luo shot a considering glance at Bai Qining. By directly relying on her perception, she could tell that Bai Qining, this person, would be all smiles towards anyone. However, his smile never reached his eyes. Sometimes he seemed like a profoundly mysterious old fox. However, he didn't seem to have any evil intent towards herself. Instead, he seemed to be interested in helping her. Why was this? Though if she didn't take the small advantages, then she was a damn fool. Su Luo would never let such a good opportunity slip by. One could only see Su Luo salute towards Bai Qining and lightly smile. Venerable Bai Qin, do you feel that the way I am dressed is that of a person who can afford to issue a task? Bai Qining very tactfully played along. He stroked his chin and looked at Su Luo from top to bottom, shaking his head and said, I have seen that task. It costs 3,000 gold coins. To sell, even 10 times of the you right now would still not cover the price. Naturally, it also depended on who dared to buy her. Bai Qining could pat his chest and pledge. Whoever dared to buy Su Luo, he guaranteed that person would encounter the calamity of having their entire family exterminated in less than a quarter of an hour. Nobody had noticed, but Bai Qining would only use the word I to refer to himself in front of Su Luo, whereas in front of everyone else, he would refer to himself as this lord. Both person echoed one another. It seemed that they were about to wash clean the charges against Su Luo. Now Su Jingyu interrupted and said, Humph, God knows if she is pretending to be poor in front of people. In my opinion, it's better to go to that courtyard and search around. Maybe a pile of gold coins could be hidden within that room. It turns out that the pile of gold coin of unknown origin from that day was to be used for this. Su Luo repeatedly sneered in her heart. However, on the surface, Su Luo did not bat an eye and looked at him. A hard-to-perceive thread of alarm flashed across her eyes. With no cause or reason. And you want to search my courtyard? Humph. What kind of reasoning is this? It was quite clear. The fear in Su Luo's eyes from losing her head, and the feigned calm on her face, allowed Su Jingyu to catch it just in time at the end. One could see him laugh nastily and say, Since you said you are innocent, why would you be afraid of everyone searching? Humph. Your courtyard evidently had hidden money of unidentifiable origins. One can always trump up a charge against someone. Su Luo argued for what was right. However, her body appeared to tremble slightly from fear. Su Jingyu was even more pleased with himself. He solemnly saluted towards Su Zian, and raised his head to sternly say, The Honorable Father, since Su Luo won't confess even if she were to die, so now, the only method is to search her courtyard. To demand a search or not, we'll ask Father to make a decision. The Crown Prince suddenly stood up and indolently said, Having sat for so long, going out for a walk is also pretty good. This was to express his consent. Su Zian once again looked at Bai Qining, who knew that Bai Qining, who always made it his business to oppose the Crown Prince, would also stretch his body. Since the Crown Prince wants to take a walk, then this official would accompany on this walk. Both lordly persons had spoken. How could Su Zian have the status to still refuse? His dark and fierce gaze stared at Su Luo. He frostily said. Good, now we will go search. Once the result of the search has come out, afterwards let's see how you would argue. Wait, Su Luo shouted and halted the crowd of nobility preparing to take a step out, and sneeringly asked. If you search the stuff, then what? If you can't find anything, then what? Want to search for gold? Ouch, she truly found it embarrassing to say. Those gold. This lady had already dug out. However, it was all piled up in this lady's space. Even if you wanted to search, dream on. Momentarily, everyone's gaze focused upon Su Xian's face. Su Xian pondered for a short while. His expression was frosty and he sternly said, If we search and find it, then from now on your name Su Luo would be removed from the Su family. If we find nothing in the search, then... Chapter 191. Unexpected Surprise 1. If the search doesn't produce any results, then all the Su family members present will pour tea and apologize to me. Nobody is allowed to renege. Su Luo's beautiful pitch-black eyes swept everyone around her. Her eyes were filled with a faint taunting overtone. Su Xian's footsteps stopped. He never imagined that Su Luo would raise such a disrespectful condition. He wanted to refute it immediately. However, Bei Qining only faintly smiled and slanted a quick glance towards Su Xian, then smilingly said, What the fourth Miss Su said is correct. How can a young lady's bedchamber be a place where anybody that wanted to could enter? On top of that, how can it also be a place where anyone who wanted to can enter and perform a search whenever they wanted? If it were allowed, then doesn't the law exist anymore? The great General Su, how do you feel? Bei Qining gave off a careless appearance, but his entire body issued out a powerful pressure that bore down on Su Xian, making his heart palpitate. The corner of Su Xian's mouth stiffened and was pulled into a smile. What the venerable Bei Qining said is absolutely right. He slanted his head towards Su Luo and with a cold smile said, Fine. We'll do it according to what you said. If our search does not find anything, the Su family members present will all pour you tea and apologize. Furthermore, you will be paid 10,000 gold coins in compensation. Now, do you still have something you are not at ease about? There could be a 10,000 gold coins gain. Then it really couldn't be better. Su Luo expressed her satisfaction with the result of this negotiation. Having both the Venerable Bei Qining and His Highness the Crown Prince to bear witness, Su Luo feels assured. The implication was that in regards to her cheap father, she didn't feel assured. This sentence infuriated Su Xian to the point that his complexion became ashen. But he didn't dare to let his face flare up with rage. He ferociously threw his sleeves and took large strides to leave the room. A delegation of people arrived at Su Luo's courtyard on the far side. Bei Qining glanced at the battered low wall with lime falling off from the top of it. The bare wall exposed the shabby yellow mud inside. Furthermore, the customary door at the entrance of the courtyard unexpectedly did not exist. With a smile at the corner of his mouth, Bei Qining pointed at the courtyard and said, The great General Su, I never would have thought that your home manor would have such a shabby courtyard. Do you keep it as an antique to provide a place for people to tour? Su Xian's stern eyebrows nodded. A trace of blush from shame flashed across his ashen face. He smothered a humph sound. The venerable Bei Qining truly loves to crack jokes. Bei Qining's pair of storm-tossed watery eyes feigned a serious expression. Oh, don't tell me people can actually live here. Su Xian's face revealed an embarrassed color. He masked his discomfiture by using his fist to cover the edge of his lip, and coughed a few times. We are here. Bei Qining had a flabbergasted expression when looking back at Su Xian. A pair of beautiful eyes were opened wide. With an incredulous expression, Bei Qining pointed at the courtyard. This, the fourth Miss Su actually lives here? This can't be true, right? No one could deny that Bei Qining had a very great gift for acting. He had a blend of shock, surprise, and disbelief on his face. In contrast, Su Xian displayed the most awkward countenance. Su Xian distinctly coughed once, and avoided Bei Qining's topic, as it caused him some embarrassment. He lifted his robe, and took the lead to walk into the courtyard. His actions were already quite obvious. It was clear that if he wasn't heedful of Bei Qining's powerful family, he would have fallen out with Bei Qining on the spot. However, just who was this Bei Qining? He had a reputation in the capital of being the #1 hedonistic son of rich parents. How could he be made to leave so easily? Moreover, in order to redeem his mistake made inside the hall previously, he naturally must properly taunt Su Zian well for a turn. He had to allow a certain stingy man's sharp heart's beloved young lady to vent her anger. Consequently, everyone could only look on as Bei Qining intentionally stood by Su Zian's side. His beautiful eyes evaluated the circumstances within the courtyard in every direction. He repeatedly shook his head and sighed. This is really such a huge shock. It really is too hard to believe. It is extremely hard to imagine. This is just too extremely insulting. Such a famous and stately aristocratic family. Such a stately great general's manner. To go as far as allowing one's own daughter to live in this kind of house that would collapse from one blow of wind. This simply is maltreatment. Yes, this is maltreatment. When Su Zian heard what was said, he felt the veins on his forehead burst out throbbing. Chapter 192. Unexpected surprise 2. The hands at the side of his body clenched into fists. What he really wanted to do now was to flatten Bei Qining with one punch. How could there be this kind of person? Being a guest at another person's home, and not saying anything pleasant to hear. Only picking out the most offensive things to say. The pitiful Su Zian didn't know. Now the most august person in his eyes, the venerable Bei Qian's #1 goal was to curry favor with Su Luo. Ridiculing Su Zian was the best method to curry favor with Su Luo. As a result, the pitiful Su Zian was destined for a tragic end. One could only see Bei Qining with both of his hands behind his back, unhurriedly strolling around within the courtyard. While walking, he was also shaking his head, and had his long slim forefinger pointed at Su Zian gesturing. His face had a dissatisfied expression. General Su, it's not that this lord wants to chide you. This heart is too prejudiced. So partial that there doesn't seem to be a limit. Su Zian's expression became increasingly black, like that of the bottom of a pot. His breathing became heavy and coarse, then was stretched out for longer. It was obvious that he was doing his utmost to suppress the rage. An annoyed mood appeared in Madame Su's heart. But she also knew that Bei Qining was not someone she could offend. Therefore, with her sweet-tempered and gentle smile, she softly said, Venerable Bei Qian shouldn't say it this way. Luo are living here. It was really because there was no alternative due to difficulties. Having no alternative due to difficulties? Living here? Bei Qianing's smile seemed to contain a deep meaning to expose the truth. Madame Su, what kind of difficulties existed that gave you no alternative? Madame Su had just carelessly said some nonsense. Where could such difficulties exist? Why would she have thought that Bei Qining could win an inch, and unexpectedly wanted a foot? Momentarily, she stared blankly back at him. Bei Qining suddenly gave a smile of having clearly understood. He shook his head and sighed. Alas, Madame Su. In fact, everyone is able to comprehend. After all, the fourth Miss Su was not birthed by you. You dispatched her to this place where people wouldn't live, letting her to emerge or perish on her own. This is also pardonable. The content of his words immediately made the smile at the corner of Madame Su's mouth became rigid. It no longer allowed her to smile. Madame Su's hands, hidden in her sleeves, clenched into fists. Biting her teeth, she squeezed out an extremely stiff smile. Venerable Bei Qian. Madame Su, you really don't need to explain. After all, there is a difference between the first wife and the concubines, right? Everyone understands. Seeing Madame Su's expression was the same shade of black as the great General Su's, Bei Qining once again added another sentence. However, don't blame this lord for chiding you. No matter how your heart may be unwilling, on the surface, shouldn't you make it look a little better? Now you even disdain to make efforts on the surface. Fancy that the emperor actually bestowed you the title of first-rate traditional wife. TSK. Only Bei Qining dared to speak so unrestrainedly. If he was replaced by any other person, the great General Su would have already commanded people to beat him to death with wooden boards. Now, the great General Su and Madame Su were both not lightly angered. Both of them did their utmost to endure it, so they wouldn't explode. However, they were very close exploding, only lacking the last straw. Su Luo's heart was secretly curious. Where was this divine being Bei Qining from? His words were without the slightest scruples. Yet Su Zian and Madame Su unexpectedly didn't flare up. However, what made Su Luo feel even more baffled was that this person, in all respects, unexpectedly supported her. Every word and every sentence was used to fight for justice on her behalf. Why would he do this? Moreover, when he had finished ridiculing Su Zian and Madame Su, afterwards he would often make eyes towards her. A cute appearance, and one of taking credit for his own achievement, making people simply being unable to help but laugh. Who was this person? Had she met him before? Su Luo touched her chin and sank into contemplation. The Crown Prince swept a quick glance at Su Zian and Madame Su. He also glared at Bei Qining. With displeasure, he brushed at his sleeves and said, "Only you could be this long-winded. Say a few sentences less. No one would think you were mute." Chapter 193. Unexpected Surprise 3. Bei Qinying's favorite hobby in life had always been to pick fights with the Crown Prince. Since the Crown Prince took the initiative to provoke him, if he didn't counterattack, then wouldn't he be losing face? The corner of Bei Qinying's mouth rose into a careless smile. His liquid eyes flickered with a mocking overtone. His Highness the Crown Prince is not long-winded, but you only do things and not speak of them, having done all kinds of misdeeds to exhaustion. You should take care that after you birth a son, nothing would happen to him. You court death. The Crown Prince did not speak, but the imperial bodyguard at his side pulled out his long sword and thrust towards Bei Qining. However, before that imperial bodyguard could get close to Bei Qining, a black-clothed person flashed out from behind Bei Qining. Both of his fingers were like iron clamps, pinching towards the throat of that imperial bodyguard. In merely a split second, that imperial bodyguard's body folded onto the ground. Both of his eyes were tightly closed, his body was stiff, forever unable to wake up. The black-clothed man noiselessly withdrew to behind Bei Qinying's back, so faint as if he didn't exist. Killing a person without a trace, killing a person as if it was nothing, killing a person without regard for life, and without any scruples, unrestrained, uninhibited. Bei Qining smiled with great sincerity and kind-heartedly. His manner was so happy and content, as if the person on the ground was just sleeping, not that he had lost his life. His Highness the Crown Prince was so angry that his face became red. However, he was self-aware. Even adding all the people behind him together was not enough to kill the black-clothed man. Also, Bei Qinying's methods were very ruthless. He really would kill every one of the Crown Prince's subordinates without any qualms. Su Zian hurriedly came to smooth things over. He said a lot of words, and was finally able to get the Crown Prince to step down while getting back a little of his face. Su Luo's gaze landed on Bei Qinying's body. At this moment, she started to become a little interested in this sunny youngster, whose red-robed body seemed to be possessed by the devil. She was very curious about what kind of stuff he would do next to stupefy everyone. "Venerable Bei Qian, since we are here to search, then can we start now?" Su Zian indifferently asked. He repeatedly had to lower his face. Even if Su Zian wanted to curry favor with Bei Qining, it was also hard for his heart to take it. A smile appeared on Bei Qinying's handsome face, which was white as jade. His smile had a tint of mystery within. He was only seen opening his sleeves widely and carelessly saying, "This is the general's manner, when to start the search. Naturally, General Su has the final say. Why would you come and ask this, Lord?" Su Zian was almost infuriated to the point of falling flat on his face. What kind of person was this? Since he entered Su Manor and until now, when did he act like a guest? Now, contrary to expectations, he considered himself to be a guest. Su Zian's heart was very angry, but a smile appeared on his face. Then since it's like this, let's start now. So that he could make this murderous star leave at the earliest time, and have Su Manor's peace be restored earlier. Under Su Zian's command, a group of grandiose soldiers charged into that dilapidated courtyard. The corner of Madame Su's mouth lifted into a sneer that was seemingly not there. Today she had suffered quite a bit of anger, but if she could eliminate Su Luo in one stroke, Why should she care about this little bit of anger? There were about 30 soldiers that went in. They thoroughly searched Su Luo's stuff in her room. They even dug out the corner wall. However, very quickly, all the soldiers came out, headed by that Captain Zhao whose complexion was evidently, at a glance, not so good. With a few steps, he arrived in front of Su Zian. The corner of his eyes, however, made contact with Madame Su's eyes. He shook his head slightly, almost indiscernible to others. Madame Su's complexion immediately became ugly. Su Zian didn't notice Captain Zhao and Madame Su's dialogue. His bearing was imposing, and in a cold voice he said, "Did you find anything from the search?" Even though Captain Zhao was reluctant to say it, nevertheless he still shook his head. Reporting back to the great general, "There are no gold coins in the room." "Then are there any valuable treasures?" Madame Su inserted a sentence. Chapter 194. Unexpected Surprise 4. Nothing. Captain Zhao's heart was somewhat sympathetic to Su Luo. Within that broken-down home, all the valuable items added together were not worth even 10 taels of silver. This was still one of the great general's mis-ah. Madame Su's expression became ugly. How could it be like this? Plainly, Madame Su shot a glance at the maid Jianmei who stood behind her. The frosty rays bursting from those eyes made Jianmei shiver from the cold. "Madam!" Jianmei was just about to explain, but she only heard Madame Su lowering her voice to admonish her. "Shut up!" Here, there were many people with high martial arts cultivation that Jianmei might not have discovered. No matter how much she lowered her voice, she still couldn't guarantee that someone couldn't overhear, especially that venerable Bei Qining, who was enigmatic but full of enmity towards Su Manor. Madame Su sent her gaze towards Bei Qining. Unexpectedly at this moment, Bei Qining just so happened to look at her. His beautiful pitch-black eyes were like ink, as clear as a spring, the water so clear, you could see all the way through to the bottom. Now inside that pair of liquid eyes contained a barely concealed deliberate ridicule. Madame Su's heart was abruptly shocked. The deep anticipation in his eyes. What was the meaning? Such a clear and bright pair of eyes, like a sharp sword that could pierce through the secrets in the deepest abyss of a person's heart. This was the first time that Madame Su had an unfathomable, mysterious gut feeling of terror that started at the soles of her feet and slowly crawled up. Su Zian's expression was somewhat indeterminately switching from overcast to clear. At this moment, he was repeatedly repenting. He regretted listening to Su Jingyu's words and coming to search Su Luo's courtyard. Now that there was nothing here, it made it seem as though he had been very ferociously slapped in the face. If it was any other normal day, then fine. But presently, the venerable Bei Qining was here, and it also seemed as if he was here for revenge. He grabbed onto every trivial matter and wouldn't let go, every single time embarrassing him. At this point of time, Su Zian was suffering bitterly and could not speak out. Perhaps even the heavens also could not stand by and watch idly. All of a sudden, among the soldiers searching in the courtyard, one of them let out a slightly surprised sound. What happened? Su Zian could not bear the taunting expression Bei Qining cast upon his body, and quickly walked over there. Reporting back to the general, "There seems to be something odd under here." That round-faced soldier pointed at the ground and responded full of certainty. Su Zian looked at the ground, then looked again at that huge locust tree. A touch of pleasant surprise appeared in his eyes. About 100 years ago, during that war and the chaos in the capital, Elder Su had ordered some gold to be buried in the ground, to guard against the unexpected. He prepared it for use in times of need. After the war and chaos ended, the gold was dug out in succession. Inevitably, some might have been overlooked. The huge locust tree? Yes, that's right. In that same year, it was marked by a locust tree. Could it be, there really was gold buried under here? Su Zian immediately became excited. He waved his large hand and loudly commanded, "Dig!" Consequently, a group of soldiers brandished shovels and iron picks started digging around that several hundreds of years old locust tree very quickly. This event made Su Zian extremely excited. That round-faced soldier could only be seen loudly yelling out, "Something is here! There is something under here! Take it out!" Quickly take it out, Su Zian loudly said. Yet now, a trace of worry appeared on Madame Su's face. She didn't know why. She seemed to have a premonition that did not bode well. She had the nagging feeling that something odd was going on, because according to Jian Mei's report, at that time, Su Luo had moved all the gold coins into her room, so there should not be any gold coins left in this hole. Therefore, Madame Su tried to secretly stop this and said, General, it's better to use caution before bringing it up. Su Zian waved his large hand and pushed Madame Su away. What could happen? You are too soft-hearted. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.